Chapter 1475. Practicality is the most important aspect of knife skills. Harris's potato pieces may seem ordinary and messy, but they have already included all the variations. No matter what dish you want to make, you can choose and match the best cutting method from them. Jeffrey raised his hand and pointed at Harris. My vote is for him. 3, 2. Master Harris wins, someone in the crowd exclaimed. However, this result wasn't too surprising. This was an exciting knife skills duel. The two chefs used different styles to demonstrate their exquisite knife skills. However, to the regular customers of Mamie's, it was still hard for them to accept that Mr. Mack had lost. Young friend, it seems like I have won the first round, Harris said to Meg with a smile. Meg nodded slightly to express his approval of this result. Although he had already used his knife skills to the extreme, just like what Jeffrey had said, the skills that Harris displayed represented all-roundness and practicality. It was a little like returning to the basics. He knew his own standards very well. He could perform the dishes that he had learned in the test field for the god of cookery to the extreme. However, if it was a dish that he hadn't learned before, he couldn't guarantee that his knife skills could achieve the desired effect. That was the difference between him and Harris. Boss actually lost, Yabamiya said disappointedly. She had never seen her boss lose before. Seems like this chef is indeed very impressive. Phyllis looked at Harris nervously. If Meg lost, would they all lose their jobs? All of a sudden, everyone at Mamie's became a little nervous. It's all right. It's just the first round. Boss doesn't lose to anyone when it comes to cooking, Elizabeth said calmly. But does Boss have any cold dishes that he's good at? Yabamiya said worriedly. From what I remember, he hasn't made any cold dishes before. There's no cold dishes on the menu, right? Everyone was stunned when they heard that. They also suddenly realized the seriousness of this problem. Harris looked at Meg and said, since my young friend doesn't have any doubts, then our first knife skills duel will come to an end. I am leading with a score of 1 o'clock. Next, we will begin the second round, the cold dishes duel. The rules of the duel are also very simple. Each of us will make a cold dish, and the judge will decide the winner after tasting it. What do you think? I agree. Meg nodded and returned to his stove. The loss in the first round made him feel a sense of danger. It also showed him the true abilities of the world's top chefs. Exquisite knife skills could be accumulated through decades of hard work. Relying on the test field for the god of cookery and the experience of being a top-notch chef directly instilled in him. It was like taking a shortcut that allowed him to improve steadily. The foundation at the bottom was too superficial. Of course, this did not affect his ability to cook delicious food according to the recipe. For cold dishes, he could only choose the spicy beef and chili long slice. This made him feel somewhat fortunate. If he hadn't drawn this dish before, he wouldn't have known how to deal with this situation. The audience gradually quietened down. The first knife skills duel was already so exciting. Naturally, they were looking forward to the second cooking duel even more. All right, before the duel starts, I would like to ask for a volunteer from the audience. Harris scanned the crowd with his eyes and smilingly said, the cold dish I want to make is called 18-year-old girl's dress. The ingredients are all prepared, but I'm lacking an 18-year-old girl in a dress to help me carry the tray. Is there any girl who is willing to volunteer? There's such an interesting thing. The crowd instantly became restless. Some of the girls in dresses were eager to try, but they were too shy to come out. Me. Vanessa raised her hand and shouted, Moss. Miss, you're only 16 years old. You are not 18 yet. Laura reminded her softly as she tugged at her skirt. It's okay. If you don't say, and Uncle doesn't say, who knows? Vanessa quickly answered softly with her hand still raised high. Harris's gaze landed on Vanessa, and he smiled as he waved his hand and said, all right, then let's invite the beautiful girl over. Vanessa walked forward happily and bowed slightly to Harris. She happily said, I am your loyal fan, and have seen all your challenge records. I am very curious about your building blocks delicacy. Look at this little mouth. It's like it's smeared with honey. I will give you special permission to eat with the judges later. Harris smiled so widely that his eyes disappeared. Thank you. Vanessa said happily. She turned around and winked at Meg as she mouthed, "All the best." "Duke, isn't young mistress being too high-profile?" Laura asked worriedly. "It's okay. This is what she should be doing at her age. She has been suppressed for too long. It's time for her to release herself properly," Abraham said with a smile as he looked at Vanessa. Abraham looked at Vanessa with a smile. Her brother would be here to bring her back in a few days. There were not many chances like this. The young ladies in the crowd who missed the opportunity couldn't help but feel regretful. They actually missed the chance to taste the delicacies with the judges because of that little bit of hesitation. Everyone's gaze landed on Meg, as they wondered if Meg would need help too. They definitely couldn't miss such an opportunity. Meg glanced at Vanessa before his gaze landed on the audience. He calmly said, "The cold dish I am going to make is called husband and wife lung slice. Is there anyone, me?" Before Meg could finish his sentence, George had already squeezed out of the crowd with Miranda's hand. Husband and wife lung slice. Did Mr. Mack's dish require a volunteer couple to donate their lungs? The entire place fell silent instantly. Everyone was looking at George and Miranda strangely. Meanwhile, some of the couples in the audience hurriedly let go of each other's hands and kept a distance. They pretended that they weren't a couple so that they wouldn't be taken advantage of. George also realized the severity of the problem. He rushed out in a hurry just to get a chance to taste the dish. He didn't expect to drag Miranda into this mess. He looked at Meg bitterly and said, "Mr. Mack, my lungs shouldn't be small. Why don't you cut less? Just cut mine?" "No need. I have already prepared the ingredients." Meg shook his head. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as they looked at Mag in horror. They wondered which poor couple had fallen into Mag's hands and been killed by him. "Young friend, your dish name is quite interesting." Harris also looked at Meg in shock. He thought that his 18-year-old girl dress was already flirtatious enough, but it still lost to Meg's bloody style. "It's getting late. Let's start." Meg raised his hand to look at his watch. He still had to prepare for the lunch service. Chapter 1476. 18-year-old girl's dress versus husband and wife lung slice. This didn't look like a proper gourmet duel, did it? Yet, all of this was happening right in front of Amy's. Husband and wife lung slice? Could this be a new dish that Mr. Mack came up with recently? This dish doesn't seem to be on the menu, right? There's no need to doubt. This must be a new dish that Mr. Mack came up with. I just don't know if he has succeeded. Otherwise, why hasn't he released it yet? Mr. Mack has always maintained the freshness of the ingredients. Wouldn't it be a little too cruel if he were to take the lungs out on the spot? The regulars at Amy's expressed great interest in the dish that Meg was going to make. After all, Meg was always able to surprise everyone. They hoped that he would be able to bring a different dish today. "Since when did Boss research new dishes behind our backs again?" Yabamiya mumbled. "He has never researched new dishes in front of us," Elizabeth replied calmly. "I agree with that. I think Boss is just thinking about it in his head. After some time, he will naturally come up with a new dish." Phyrus nodded in agreement. She had never seen Meg specially researching new dishes in the kitchen, yet he was able to maintain the speed of releasing new dishes. The most impressive thing was that he could ensure the taste of the new dishes. "How long will this cold dish take, my young friend?" Harris asked Meg. Meg pondered for a moment and replied, 31 minutes. "Seems like it will be a very complicated cold dish." Harris pondered for a moment before nodding. "All right, then, let's set the time for the second round at 33 minutes. My soup needs to be simmered for almost an hour. If we do it step by step, it will affect the restaurant's lunch service. Hence, I plan to start making the soup at the same time as the cold dish. Is that okay?" Meg asked Harris. "Seems like my young friend is very confident in beating me in the cold dish category." Harris smiled and said, "Since that's the case, I agree with you making 2 dishes at the same time. My soup also needs to be simmered for almost an hour, so I will make the soup at the same time as you." "Okay." Meg nodded. He liked people who were straightforward. "Are you going to cook 2 dishes at the same time?" The audience was a little surprised by Meg and Harris's simple and crude decision. However, the time taken for the 2 dishes to be completed was different, so the time taken to reveal the results was naturally different as well. Hence, the order wasn't disrupted. If Master Harris wins the second round, won't the competition end soon? Mr. Mack isn't someone who would admit defeat easily. If he didn't have absolute confidence, he wouldn't have said something like that. It won't be easy for one to catch up to two. The audience discussed softly. They were both nervous and expectant about the direction of this match. Senior brother, Master should be fine, right? A young man, carrying a black wok, whispered to the senior brother beside him. I've been wandering with my master for more than 10 years. I've seen at least 800 chefs, if not 1,000. Any chef who dares to compete with my master, even if he's a god, will win. What's there to worry about? That senior brother said calmly as he picked his nose. In such a situation, such a young chef was nothing in his eyes. Many of those chefs who lost to his master were old chefs who had immersed themselves in cooking for their entire lives. They had countless honors and titles on their shoulders, but they could only lower their heads and admit defeat in front of their master. The 18-year-old girl's dress was one of his master's best cold dishes. He had once defeated the Goblin King of cold dishes with this dish. Since his master had taken out this dish, today's duel would naturally end here. That young man's expression became much more relaxed after hearing that. He secretly sized up those beautiful ladies standing at the entrance of the restaurant. He rarely saw such beautiful ladies on the streets. Even if he only took a few glances, he would feel his face heating up. Chapman came between the two of them with a big clock and loudly said, 33 minutes start. As Chapman finished speaking, Meg and Harris also started to move at the same time. Harris took out all kinds of ingredients from the basket at the side unhurriedly. They were all vegetables, and he washed them in a wooden bucket filled with clean water. Every step was slow and gentle. He was so careful that he even washed the gaps between the leaves 2 to 3 times before stopping. On the other hand, Meg's actions were much faster. He washed the beef, ox tongue, ox heart, ox scalp, and tripe one by one. He lit a fire on the stove, set up a pressure cooker, and put in all the ingredients and condiments that he had prepared. He boiled them on high heat and then stewed them on medium heat. Making husband and wife lung slice was a very complicated matter. The braising process required a lot of time. Due to the limited time, Meg used a pressure cooker to allow the beef and beef offal to seep in quickly and achieve the effect of not being mushy even after being raked. After braising the meat in the pot, Meg set up an old Shaoxing wine jar on the stove and put in all kinds of precious seafood and ingredients. He poured in the stock, sealed the wine jar's lid, and let it simmer slowly. Buddha Jumps Over the Wall was the soup that Meg chose. As a top-notch soup, he had already defeated one opponent. Today would be the second time it was up against an opponent. Of course, whether it would have a chance to appear on stage depended on whether the husband and wife lung slice could defeat the opponent. The braising process of the husband and wife lung slice was very important. Mixing it with cold sauce was injecting the soul into it. After heating up the pot and adding oil, he sprinkled in a bunch of Chaotian pepper, then added Sichuan pepper, star anise, senai, onion, garlic, ginger, and sugar. After simmering over low heat, a pot of fragrant and spicy chili oil started to emit a captivating aroma. After stir-frying the sesame seeds and smashing the peanuts into powder, Meg put away his knife and stood at the side to wait for the braised meat to be done. Meanwhile, on the other side, Harris was holding the sori in his hand and slicing the ingredients meticulously. The ingredients of different colors were sliced into different shapes by his hands. Some of them were tossed into a pot of boiling water and then quickly scooped up before being carefully arranged on a plate. Some of them were directly scattered on a large plate and became a corner of a skirt. The entire cooking process was like a painting. The white big plate was the canvas, and the various ingredients were the paint that was freely scattered on it. This is probably the so-called rhythm of cooking, right? Meg took a look at Harris and was immediately attracted by his selfless state. That was a very magical state that could even make people who looked at him gradually calm down. Most of the customers' gazes were attracted by Harris. It was really too rare to see such a highly aesthetically pleasing cooking method. Ding! The high-pressure stew made a soft sound, and Meg retracted his gaze. He turned off the fire and waited for another 3 minutes before placing the high-pressure stew directly into the freezer. The high-pressure state was quickly removed. Meg took out the high-pressure stew and gently exhaled before opening the stew. The rich aroma of the braised meat instantly bloomed together with the steam. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1477. The rich aroma of braised meat wafted out like a delicious bomb exploding in the crowd. Smells so good. The audience, who were watching Harris's picturesque cooking with great interest, looked in Meg's direction along the aroma and swallowed their saliva subconsciously. What's this smell? It smells like the preserved meat in Ruggiamo, but it feels very different. Abraham took a deep breath and muttered to himself. Abraham murmured as he took a deep sniff. He then stood on his tiptoes and peered into the steaming pot, but he couldn't see what was going on inside due to the mist that permeated the air. Mr. Mac's new product indeed didn't disappoint. Vanessa also craned her neck to look in Meg's direction. As she was closer, the rich aroma was even more obvious. She couldn't help but salivate. This taste is very special. It's as if many kinds of spices and seasonings have been added to it, but it's not messy at all. It even makes the fragrance of the beef particularly obvious. This kind of control over spices is really surprising. Chapman looked at Meg in shock. He could tell what most of the spices were, but there were also many aroma that made him confused. In his understanding and the teachings of his master, too many spices couldn't make the food more delicious. Instead, it would make the food lose its own characteristics because of the mixture. However, the beef's aroma was still the dominant one in this aroma. It became even more dazzling under the contrast of all the other fragrances. Before tasting it, one could already feel the satisfaction and anticipation of a mouthful of meat aroma. The Blackwalk comrades who were waiting for their master to easily win the duel had all put away their contempt and were now nervous and curious. Senior brother, is it really okay? It's no big deal. Master will definitely win. The senior brother who was digging his nose earlier had already put down his hand, but he still tried his best to remain calm as he spoke. This meat's aroma is quite interesting. Harris also couldn't help but stop what he was doing and look at the pot in front of Meg in shock. Beef, tripe, heart, tongue, and scalp are mixed together to cook. Originally, it should have had a very strong odor, but it was cleverly merged with the spices to become the best accompaniment to the fragrance of the meat. He did not rely on the heavy flavor of the spices to suppress it. Instead, he went with the flow. The rich, meaty flavor of the beef and beef offal was completely stimulated with the spices, making the aroma gentle but not invasive, making it extremely tempting. This little friend is young, but his understanding of spices is not to be underestimated. Harris looked up at Meg, but his expression gradually became excited. It had been some time since he met such an opponent. Harris quickly retracted his gaze and began to focus more on the 18-year-old maiden's dress in front of him. He was still as carefree and unrestrained as before. However, the audience's curiosity was completely piqued by Meg. The rich aroma of the meat made it difficult for them to watch Meg cook calmly. They were more curious about what kind of dish Meg was cooking. The rich aroma of the meat instantly tipped the scales of victory, and the expressions of the Amy's members brightened. But isn't Boss making a cold dish? It's so fragrant and steaming. It doesn't look like a cold dish at all, Yabamiya said doubtfully. It's just a cold dish after heating it up. That shouldn't be a difficult thing, right? Barbara was not worried at all. She gulped and softly said, "Do we have a right to taste it? If there are leftovers, you should be able to taste it," Connie said with a smile. The audience was also troubled by the same doubts. They all wanted to know how Meg continued to cook this fragrant beef into a cold dish. Meg did not pay much attention to the noise around him and focused all his attention on the braised meat in front of him. The fragrance of the braised meat was just right, and the broth was brown and bright. It was a color that looked appetizing. He scooped the beef and beef offal out of the pot with a colander. The braised beef and beef offal were brown, and the broth had already seeped into them perfectly. The color and aroma were very alluring. He placed the meat on a small sieve and then drained the gravy before putting it into the freezer. Rapid freezing would affect the texture of the meat, so Meg did not set the temperature to be very low. While letting the heat dissipate, he also ensured that the texture of the braised meat would not be destroyed. This was not the standard cooking method for sliced beef and ox tongue in chili sauce. Just the braising of the meat alone required 4 hours of slow simmering to allow the spices and braising to seep into the beef and beef awful slowly. The texture and taste would reach its peak during this process. However, Meg used a pressure cooker to save time. This pressure cooker had been modified by the system and could achieve 80 to 90% of the effect. However, it was still lacking a little. The aroma was sealed, and Meg stood at the side with his hands behind his back as he calmly watched Harris set up the plate. He should be making a vegetable platter. The 18 vegetables were cut into various sizes and shapes, and then put together into a floral dress. The ingenious color combination and the complicated stacking method made the dress look rich and vibrant. It looked very beautiful. The process of watching the dress grow from nothing was even more artistic. It was just like watching an artist paint, and everyone was amazed by Harris's superb skills. What a beautiful dress. I like this little dress. I like this little dress, a young lady said with sparkling eyes as she looked at the dress that was slowly taking shape. Many ladies in the crowd had similar expressions. Everyone wanted to wear a beautiful dress like this when they were 18 years old. During the interval, Harris didn't forget to boil a pot of water on another stove. He added a few unique spices before covering the pot and continuing to set up the dress. After about 28 minutes, Harris inserted the last strip of red radish into the dress and then took 2 steps back. He heaved a sigh of relief as he looked at his work with satisfaction. A colorful dress had already appeared on the white plate. The fresh vegetables gave the dress the most vibrant colors. The various ingredients that were seamlessly connected together made the dress look perfect from any angle. It was a dress for summer, but it still looked very eye-catching in winter. This couldn't be called a cold dish anymore. It was more like a piece of art that was meticulously carved by a master. This is the most beautiful dish I have ever seen. It's incomparably beautiful. In terms of looks, I think it has already won. How do we eat it? No matter where we start, it feels like an unforgivable destruction. The audience was full of praises. At the same time, they were worried about how to eat it. All right, my 18-year-old girl's dress is already completed. Miss, please help me present it to the judges, Harris said to Vanessa with a smile. All right, Vanessa nodded. Then, she picked up the large plate with both hands nervously and walked to the judges' table carefully. A beautiful young lady holding a beautiful young lady's dress. This scene was very pleasing to the eyes. On the other side, Meg had just taken out the braised meat that had cooled down from the freezer. He took out the fathead fish and prepared to slice it. Chapter 1478. Vanessa placed the plate gently in the middle of the judge's table and took 2 steps back. She heaved a long sigh of relief after making sure that the plate didn't shift. This was the first time she realized how tiring it was to serve a plate. Of course, the most important reason was that she didn't want to see such a delicacy that was as exquisite as a piece of art being ruined in her hands. The pressure was greater than the weight. All the judges' gazes were already attracted by the 18-year-old girl's dress. The art of plate presentation has been utilized to the extreme in this 18-year-old girl's dress. The combination of colors is moving, and the shape is perfectly fitted. It shows off the exquisite cutting skills. This is the most beautiful cold dish I have ever seen, and also the most unbearable cold dish. Robert stood up and didn't hide his admiration and praise at all. The audience nodded. President Robert said what was on everyone's mind. This is the first dress that made me want to try a dress other than the red dress. It is indeed beautiful. The Hill was also looking at that colorful dress with amazement. It was not gaudy and had the youthful energy of an 18-year-old. It was as if she could dance happily in this dress. I didn't expect Miss Hill to give such a high evaluation. All of the spectators looked at Sheer with a hint of surprise in their eyes. Everyone in Chaos City knew that young Mistress Sheer only loved red dresses and had never seen her wear dresses of any other color. The fact that she was able to give such an evaluation was a clear indication of her attitude toward this dish. "I'm not going to wear a dress, but I think my daughter would like this dress very much if she saw it," Michael said with a smile. "You changed from a suit of armor to a pretty little dress. Seems like you have been through a lot all these years," Novin said to Harris meaningfully. "Bullshit. No, this is art," Harris emphasized seriously. Jeffrey picked up his chopsticks and picked up a piece of blanched red radish from the edge of the dress. It looked like an ordinary radish, but there was actually some transparent sauce on it before he put it into his mouth. The radish that had been blanched was still crispy and tender, and the sauce with a hint of sweetness and sourness made the radish that had a hint of sweetness even more refreshing. It was the crisp and tender feeling that stimulated his originally dull tongue. His appetite was also stimulated as he anticipated the arrival of even more delicacies. Jeffrey raised his eyebrows slightly. It was a familiar style and taste. Even though so many years had passed, Harris still adhered to the principle of preserving the taste of the ingredients as much as possible. The principle of using condiments was also to minimize the impact on the ingredients as much as possible. Most of the time, they were used as supporting roles. The taste is still the same as before. Only with respect and reverence for the ingredients can one make truly delicious food. Jeffrey put down his chopsticks and looked at Harris with admiration. "You are still the best chef I've ever seen." Everyone picked up their chopsticks and tasted the dress, starting from the hem. They were all impressed. Although it seemed as if no cooking had been done because of the presentation, every ingredient had been handled perfectly and had a crisp texture. The sauce sprinkled on top of the ingredients was like the finishing touch, giving this dish a soul that made it impossible for people to stop eating. This was a very outstanding cold dish. It was refreshing and refreshing. Its advantages would be even more obvious when paired with other foods. Everyone nodded as they ate and couldn't help but take a few more bites. The 5 judges all gave extremely high comments. Is the second round over? Everyone instinctively looked at Meg, who was still presenting the dishes. If Meg lost this round again, this competition would be over. The 18-year-old girl dress that received extremely high comments had already redefined everyone's upper limit for cold dishes. From today onwards, normal cold dishes would probably not be able to catch their eyes anymore. Meg's expression was still calm and composed. The sauce on the surface of the braised beef and beef offal had already been completely dried, and he used a knife to cut them into thin slices of uniform size and thickness. The beef, tripe, heart, tongue, and scalp all looked different after being cut. Meg took a white shallow plate and placed the slices of beef and beef offal on top of each other, forming the shape of a volcano in the middle of the plate. Then, Meg took a big ladle, scooped up a spoonful of chili oil that he had prepared beforehand, and drizzled it down along the edge of the volcano, soaking the dried meat slices. He then sprinkled a handful of crushed peanuts and cooked sesame seeds, and decorated the crater with a small piece of tender green coriander. A bright red husband and wife lung slice was ready. Meg picked up the husband and wife lung slice and walked towards the judge's table. Although it's not as beautiful as the 18-year-old girl dress, this spoonful of chili oil seems to have injected a soul into it. It made me feel as hot and spicy as a hot pot. This is simply an active volcano that's ready to erupt. Abraham Adams' apple moved. Although he'd been tortured by hot pot thousands of times, he still loved it like his first love. His expectations for this so-called husband and wife lung slice had also increased instantly. Oh my God, this is a lethal amount of chili oil, right? Congratulations to Mamie's spicy family for adding another member. Compared to the light and refreshing 18-year-old girl dress, this is simply the other extreme. Does it have a chance to counterattack? The audience's gazes followed Meg as they discussed excitedly. Harris's 18-year-old girl dress brought a wonderful experience to everyone with its fresh and elegant posture, just like a young lady's. Meanwhile, the pot of bright red husband and wife lung slice in Meg's hands was like a barbarian with a red face. It came over aggressively, and people couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at it. The chili oil dyed the beef, and beef awful a bright red. Before it even entered the mouth, the aroma of the chili oil was already enough to make them swallow their saliva uncontrollably. And in the middle of that patch of red, there was a little bit of tender green coriander. It also had the artistic conception of a little green in a field of flowers. How do I eat such a dish with such a strong taste and oil? Jeffrey frowned as he looked at the husband and wife lung slice with displeasure. The other judges looked at this husband and wife lung slice with some hesitation. The bright red patch made them unsure of how to eat it all of a sudden. The plate presentation was considered exquisite, but with the 18-year-old girl dress in front of it, this level of presentation wasn't worth mentioning. Mr. Mack, how spicy is your husband and wife lung slice compared to the spicy grilled fish? Michael asked Meg. As a father who had been poisoned by the insanely spicy grilled fish, he didn't want to step on a landmine again. If it's just a comparison of spiciness, it should be around medium spiciness, Meg replied after some thought. Medium spiciness? That's good. Michael heaved a sigh of relief. He could still accept this level of spiciness. He picked up a new pair of chopsticks and picked up a piece of beef from the plate with a smile. Then, let me be the first to taste it. The thin beef was covered in bright chili oil, and there were a few cooked sesame seeds and crushed peanuts on the surface. The aroma of the braised meat and chili oil wafted over slowly. Before it entered the mouth, it had already started to stir the taste buds. With a bite, the rich aroma of the chili oil and the spiciness bloomed at the tip of the tongue at the same time. What followed was the rich braised meat aroma of the beef. The soft and smooth beef melted with a light bite. His taste buds couldn't help but tremble and go crazy as he welcomed the attack of this spicy aroma that was like a storm. Oh, this is shockingly delicious. After a long while, Michael exclaimed in admiration. Chapter 1479. Looking at the intoxicated Michael, who couldn't wait to pick up another piece of beef and put it into his mouth, he was completely hooked by the husband and wife lung slice in front of him. He looked like he didn't want to waste any time talking nonsense, which made many people secretly swallow their saliva. Is this husband and wife lung slice really so delicious to be able to make the Castellan so emotional and addicted? Many people couldn't help but feel curious. After all, when the Castellan ate the 18-year-old maiden dress, although he was full of praises, he only tasted it briefly before stopping. It was a completely different state from when he couldn't stop eating now. Meanwhile, the few judges looked at Michael, who couldn't stop eating, and revealed a look of surprise. Although this husband and wife lung slice didn't look as exquisite as the 18-year-old maiden dress, the excellent cutting skills made every piece of beef awful uniform. The aroma of the braised beef mixed with the spicy smell of the chili oil slowly drifted over, and the aroma immediately overshadowed the 18-year-old maiden dress. This chili oil looks very tempting. Let me try the taste. Robert stood up and picked up a piece of tripe. The tripe that was cut into long strips was light yellow after being braised. There was a natural mesh on the surface, and it was wrapped in a layer of bright chili oil. It looked very exquisite and tempting. Robert had eaten Mamie's hot pot before and was also a loyal fan of tripe. However, compared to the thin tripe, this tripe looked much thicker. Before tasting the tripe hot pot, Robert had always kept a respectful distance from the internal organs of animals. In his impression, the strange smell was difficult to remove no matter what cooking method was used. However, Meg used the hot pot to break his inherent impression. Moreover, in this plate, other than the tripe, there were also rare ingredients such as ox tongue, ox scalp, and ox heart. Robert was looking forward to seeing if Meg could still reproduce the amazing technique of the hot pot after changing the cooking method. When the tripe entered his mouth, his teeth began to clash with the tripe. Unlike the crispy tripe, this tripe had some chewiness, but it wasn't difficult to chew. With a little bit of force, he could bite it open, and it brought about a very wonderful chewy texture. The fragrant chili oil, cooked sesame seeds, and crushed peanuts began to bloom beautifully on the tip of his tongue. However, They were more like a group of bands wearing bright red clothes and playing gongs and drums, grandly pushing out the tripe amidst the din of gongs and drums. The braised aroma was so rich that it seemed to have seeped into every inch of the tripe, then fermented, brewed, and exploded. The chili oil, braised aroma, and the tripe's own aroma fought on the tip of the tongue and made his taste buds to react at all. He could only secretly sigh and then surrender. After chewing the tripe in his mouth and swallowing it down, Robert only felt that it was spicy and refreshing. Beads of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. He opened his mouth and exhaled a mouthful of hot air. He couldn't help but praise, "Wonderful! Although this tripe is a cold dish, it brings warmth that even hot dishes can't compare to in this cold winter. Boss Mag has once again refreshed my understanding of the culinary skills of beef offal. It's not inferior to hot pot tripe. T-teat of the hot scissors tang. MT to junk, TT to teat, TTTTST. Mimi TS is made to eat to eat. The regulars at Mamie's were suddenly in an uproar. For customers who liked to order tripe when they ate hot pot, such comments had completely raised their appetite and expectations. Gulp, Vanessa's Adam's apple rolled, but she didn't realize that such behavior was a little beneath her status, because her gaze was completely attracted by the husband and wife lung slice. She couldn't deny that the 18-year-old girl's dress was a little stunning. There probably wasn't a chef in the world who could make such a beautiful dish. However, for a hot pot fanatic and a die-hard tripe fan, how could looks be more important than a delicious tripe? At this moment, in her eyes, this bright red husband and wife lung slice was the most beautiful dish. Saliva was constantly secreting from her mouth, and if it wasn't for the inappropriate occasion, she would have already gone forward to try it herself. Michael and Robert gave extremely high comments one after another, and looking at the way they ate, it was obvious that they were far more engrossed and enjoying than when they tasted the 18-year-old girl's dress. The scales of victory seemed to be tilting towards Meg's side. To be able to make food that makes people feel blissful, it seems like this young friend is indeed not simple. Harris was still calm, but the way he looked at Meg had become more serious and serious, and the way he looked at the husband and wife lung slice had become more interested. After adding all kinds of spices and going through so many strange processes, the beef and beef offal that are made are really free from the mundane and have a wonderful taste. It really makes one curious. Harris was calm, but his disciples couldn't sit still at this moment, and many of them looked worried. "Senior, the judges have already changed their opinions. Can Master hold on?" The youngest junior couldn't help but ask worriedly. That senior tried his best to be relaxed and said, "Don't worry, there will definitely be no problem. Moreover, even if he loses this round, our Master still has one more chance. Soup is Master's forte, and a pot of sour beef bone soup has been praised by countless people before. There will definitely be no problem." Quiet, Chapman, who was standing guard beside the big clock, said as he turned around. Everyone fell silent instantly. After two judges expressed their high praises for the husband and wife lung slice one after another, the opinion that was originally leaning towards the 18-year-old girl's dress started to change. However, according to the rules, there had to be at least 3 judges to choose the dish in order to win. Hence, the evaluation of this dish by the remaining 3 judges became very important. Actually, I have always been very afraid of animal organs. Can I choose to skip this dish? Hill said apologetically as she glanced at the husband and wife lung slice without picking up her chopsticks. She still couldn't get over this hurdle. Animal organs, skin, these were all things that she couldn't accept. In this dish, there wasn't only beef tripe and beef heart. There was also beef scalp and even beef tongue. That was the beef tongue. Hill couldn't imagine herself eating the beef tongue. Once she recalled the way it used its wet and sticky tongue to draw, she knew that she couldn't accept such a strange food. As a judge, it was obviously very unprofessional and dutiful for her to say something like that, but she had no choice. There was a commotion among the audience. If Hill gave up on tasting this dish, it would be equivalent to directly choosing the 18-year-old girl's dress, which would benefit Harris. If a judge hasn't tasted the contestant's food personally, then she has no right to make a choice and evaluation. Harris took a step forward, looked at Hill, and smilingly said, "If Miss Hill can't taste it personally, then your vote will be considered invalid." Chapter 1480. Everyone looked at Harris in shock. He could have gotten this vote easily, but he stood out to reject it now. He's indeed the invincible god of cookery. His character is admirable, someone lamented. Everyone looked at Harris with more respect. This was respect for his opponent, and also to ensure the fairness of the competition. This uncle is indeed interesting. Meg looked at Harris with more interest. He didn't have a good impression of the people who came to challenge him. After all, they had to waste time on a duel that appeared out of nowhere, and they might even trigger a messy mission from a system. However, the superb culinary skills that Harris displayed, as well as his pride and bottom line as a chef, made him change his impression of other chefs. If it fails, it would mean that there might be a 2-2 tie. Then, the second round of the competition would also fail, and today's duel would become chaotic. Hill clenched her fist subconsciously. She was very clear about the chain reaction that this vote would cause. She also felt the gazes on her. As the helmswoman of the Buffett family, her pride didn't allow her to make such an inappropriate decision in such a situation. "I will taste it myself and make a fair judgment," Hill said to Harris seriously. "Ian has indeed chosen a good successor," Harris said with a smile, and raised his hand to signal to Hill. Hill picked up her chopsticks and skimmed over the tripe before pausing on the beef. However, Michael had already tasted the beef, so she continued to move forward. She skimmed over the cow's scalp and hesitated on the cow's heart and tongue. A cow's heart and a cow's tongue were both very strange parts. Just thinking about it made her stomach churn. She really couldn't imagine why Meg would use such strange ingredients to cook. There were so many other things to choose from a cow's body, such as steak, beef bones. Yet he chose these things. Hill looked at Meg with some resentment. Although she admired his talent, she wanted him to cook something else for her. Meg smiled and gestured for him to go ahead. Some foods were indeed unacceptable to some people. For example, he could not accept dark cuisine like hairy egg. It was already very bold of Mr. Hill to choose to give it a try. He hoped that she would not be too disappointed after the attempt. "Fine, I'll eat it. Isn't it just a piece of beef? Awful. I'll just swallow it." Hill retracted her gaze and thought to herself with some annoyance. Those gazes on her aroused the arrogance in her heart that was unwilling to be looked down upon. Her chopsticks stopped directly on the ox tongue, and she picked up a piece. The beef tongue had already been marinated into a maroon color and was sliced into thin slices. The middle of the slices was slightly lighter, while the outside was slightly darker. The surface was covered with a layer of bright red chili oil and was decorated with a few white cooked sesame seeds. The fragrance of the marinated beef and chili oil slowly drifted over. If no one had told her that this was beef tongue, she definitely wouldn't have recognized it. However, since she already knew that it was cow tongue, she couldn't help but think of a wet tongue. Gradually, she couldn't look at the piece of cow tongue between her chopsticks. "You can do it, Mr. Hill. It's just a piece of tongue," Hill thought to herself. Her expression was still calm as she tried to suppress the distracting thoughts in her heart. With slightly trembling hands, she put the piece of cow tongue into her mouth. She originally wanted to swallow it in one bite, but the chili oil wrapped around the tongue was a little choking. In order to maintain her elegance, she could only change her mind halfway. The cow tongue was already in her mouth, and it was too late to spit it out now. Everyone present was staring at her at this moment. If she couldn't handle the situation well, the image that she had built over the years would definitely be damaged. Then let's try it. Although she was extremely unwilling and kept thinking of the cow tongue, Mr. Hill's expression was still calm. She began to chew and taste the cow tongue like a professional judge. The spicy chili oil had already ignited her mouth. As a person who didn't like spicy food, this spiciness was a little beyond the level that she felt comfortable with. With a strange mentality, she tried to bite open the cow tongue. In her mind, the wet tongue suddenly materialized, as if it had suddenly run into her mouth. However, at this moment, A crisp and tender feeling came from the tip of her teeth, and the rich meaty aroma instantly filled her mouth. It was like a heavy punch, punching the cow tongue out of her mouth before it could do anything. Hill's cherry lips opened slightly, and she let out a soft moan that was almost inaudible. The taste that exploded in her mouth caught her a little off guard. Her legs subconsciously clamped together, and her body suddenly straightened. It was like the aroma of beef, but it was a little different. The crisp and tender texture was even more unique. Under the contrast of the braised aroma and spiciness, it ran rampant in her mouth unscrupulously, teasing the taste buds on the tip of her tongue, making her unable to stop. At this moment, she had already forgotten her disgust and fear of the cow tongue. She greedily enjoyed the taste and experience that it brought. The wet tongue, the tongue that curled up the grass. Everything was thrown to the back of her mind. She saw the green grass, the grassland, the blue sky that stretched as far as the eye could see, and the cows that were grazing on the grass. She seemed to be lying on the grass, smelling the fragrance of the grass and feeling the pulse of the earth. A black cow walked over and ate the grass beside her. The grass rolled between its tongues, and it did not look dirty. Everything was quiet and beautiful. Hill slowly opened her eyes. She had unknowingly swallowed the cow tongue, and there was still a pleasant meaty aroma between her lips and teeth, as if reminding her to have another piece of cow tongue. This cow tongue is surprisingly delicious. It can even change the fear and inherent thinking in one's heart. When you know that it's a piece of cow tongue, your heart will resist it, but when you start tasting it, you'll realize that you can't resist its deliciousness, and you'll even be addicted to it. Hill put down her chopsticks and said seriously, "The 18-year-old girl's dress is the most beautiful dish I've ever seen, but if I have to choose between the two dishes, I'll choose the husband and wife lung slice. It brings a greater surprise to my taste buds." Wow! There was a burst of soft cheers and applause in the hall. They were applauding for the cow tongue and also for Hill's courage. To be able to rid a person of their fear and abandon their inherent thinking. How delicious was the cow tongue! It gave people a lot of room for imagination. Furthermore, the most important thing was that Sheer had already made her choice and cast her vote for Meg. Victory seemed to be on Meg's side. Chapter 1481. Everyone's gazes couldn't help but land on Harris. Originally, he could have gotten this vote easily, but he pushed this vote to Mag himself. Harris smiled and gave Hill a thumbs up. "You are indeed Ian's granddaughter. You can make a fair choice. Grandpa once said that you were a strict and fair chef." He was right. The Hill nodded slightly and looked at Jeffrey with respect. Fairness is the most basic respect for one's opponent. Harris smiled nonchalantly and looked at Jeffrey and Novin. "The two of you, please make your choice too. Since that's the case, let me try this cow's scalp. Apart from being used to make leather armor, this is the first time I know that cow's skin can be eaten." Novin picked up his chopsticks and picked up a thin piece of cow's scalp. The cow's scalp was rich and colloid and looked translucent. It was also covered in a layer of chili oil, and then he put it into his mouth. The spiciness exploded in his mouth first. He bit into the cow's scalp, and the soft and chewy texture made Novin's eyes light up. The cow scalp, which was supposed to be very tough, was exceptionally soft and sticky. His teeth could easily cut it open. The plump collagen made the scalp taste a little sticky, but the stew fragrance perfectly neutralized the stickiness, making the scalp extremely sticky. It was like a gentle trap that he stepped into unknowingly, and then was dragged into the abyss of deliciousness. Novin savored it carefully. This was the first time he knew that cow's scalp could be so delicious. After swallowing it, the aroma lingered. To be able to make cow's scalp into such a soft and delicious delicacy, Mr. Mac is really admirable in terms of creativity and culinary skills. Novin put down his chopsticks and looked at Meg with admiration. Then, he regretfully said, "However, at my age, I still like to eat something fresh and delicious." Out of these two cold dishes, Harris's 18-year-old maiden dress suit might taste better. So, I choose the 18-year-old maiden dress. That should be the case. Meg nodded slightly Taste was the most subjective thing. Some people wouldn't be as satisfied as a bowl of porridge with salted vegetables, even if they had delicacies in front of them. Everyone's eyes fell on Jeffrey. He was the only one who hadn't tasted it yet. Jeffrey furrowed his brows as he looked at the bright red, spicy husband and wife long slice. It had been many years since such an oily and tasty dish appeared on his dining table. Just like what Novin had said, at their age, they liked to eat something fresh and delicious. Harris's dishes suited his taste very well. However, since he had agreed to be a judge today, he couldn't make a decision without tasting it. He picked up his chopsticks and picked up a piece of beef heart. The dark brown beef heart was thin, and one could see some fine muscle lines. The red glossy oil added a beautiful color, and the spicy smell that assaulted one's face was not as pungent as one would imagine. After looking at it for a while, Jeffrey put the beef heart into his mouth and chewed it carefully. The thin beef heart melted as soon as it entered his mouth. Just by chewing lightly, the spicy flavor exploded in his mouth. His taste buds, which had been dormant for a long time, seemed to have been splashed with a scoop of hot oil. With a sting, he instantly went berserk. That intense feeling even made him somewhat unable to control his body. Rip! The sound of cloth tearing could be heard. The clothes that were originally tightly buttoned up actually burst open 3 times, and the clothes underneath were even torn a little. The clothes were torn. Everyone couldn't help but exclaim when they saw that. They didn't expect President Jeffrey, who had always been stern, to have such a strong reaction when tasting this dish. This taste, Jeffrey was already completely immersed in the spicy flavor in his mouth. There wasn't any weird taste of organs, nor was there any oily feeling. The spicy flavor was the perfect interpretation of this mouthful of beef heart. His taste buds, which had been dull for many years, seemed to have fallen into a vengeful cheer. He seemed to have seen his younger self vaguely. He had traveled extensively and had almost traveled all over the Northern continent. Back then, he also liked to eat meat and drink wine in big mouthfuls. He pulled carts of goods and was determined to conquer every piece of land. Time flew by, and he could no longer ride a horse to continue expanding his business empire. His calm heart was ignited again because of this passionate taste. The big ship that was the family Moreton had been stagnant for many years. His expectations for Cyril were no longer for him to continue expanding the family. He only wanted him to be able to protect the Moreton family now. But now, a crazy idea appeared in his mind. What if it was someone else? What if it was Gloria? With her ability and tenacity, would she be able to set the Moreton family sail further and catch up with the Buffett family again? He felt his heart beating faster, and the hesitation in his heart gradually became firmer. After a long time, Jeffrey slowly opened his eyes. His forehead was covered in sweat. He looked up at Meg, and a smile appeared on his stern face. He said, "I should have passed the age of liking this kind of dish, but this dish makes me feel that it is an exception. It brings me a feeling that I haven't felt in a long time. So, I choose the husband and wife long slice." "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly. He was a little surprised that Jeffrey would choose him. Another judge voted for Meg. He was temporarily leading with a score of 2-1. Master Harris is still as good as ever. The 18-year-old maiden's dress is even more stunning. Mr. Meg's husband and wife lung slice uses 5 ingredients from a cow to create a unique delicacy. It is even more surprising. After a difficult choice, I choose the husband and wife lung slice. Robert raised his hand and gestured in Meg's direction. Then I won't comment further. Mr. Mac's husband and wife lung slice is more to my liking. It would be even better if there was alcohol, Michael said with a smile. Husband and wife lung slice versus 18-year-old maiden's dress. The final result was 4-1. Boss won this round. Yabamiya jumped up happily. Smiles appeared on the faces of the girls in the restaurant. Their nervous expressions relaxed a lot. If they lost the second round, this competition would be over. Looks like the husband and wife lung slice is better than 18-year-old maiden's dress in terms of taste. It's just a cold dish. Master Harris made it feel like a work of art, while Mr. Mac made it feel like a main dish. Although there is a winner, I don't think there is a difference in strength. The score is now 1-1. The competition has entered the climax. Who will be able to stay in this competition? I'm really looking forward to it. The audience also started to get restless. They were all excited. Can I try these two dishes? At this moment, a weak voice was heard. No pop-up window. Chapter 1482. Vanessa looked at Harris and Meg carefully. Although it seemed a little inappropriate to say such things in such an atmosphere, she really wanted to try the beautiful 18-year-old maiden's dress and the husband and wife lung slice that was not inferior to the hot pot tripe. She would definitely regret it if she missed it. Of course, young lady. This is what I promised you just now, Harris said with a chuckle as he looked at Meg. Young friend, you wouldn't mind, right? Miss Vanessa is a regular of the restaurant. Of course I wouldn't mind, Meg also said with a smile. Isn't this too blissful? She's as good as the sixth judge. The audience looked at Vanessa enviously and wished they could replace her and taste the deliciousness of these two dishes themselves. Thank you. Vanessa thanked him happily and walked to the judge's table. She bowed slightly to the judges before picking up a clean pair of chopsticks and picking up a piece of radish. The radish that was cut into a diamond-shaped radish looked crystal clear and had a faint fragrance. What a beautiful radish! Vanessa sighed before putting the radish into her mouth. Crunch! A crisp sound could be heard. The sweet and sour radish was very crispy, and the sweetness of the radish blended perfectly with the slightly sour sauce, awakening her taste buds instantly. It was refreshing and appetizing, and perfectly matched all her expectations of an appetizer. Of course, the most important thing was its beautiful appearance. Even though a part of the skirt had been eaten, it did not affect the beauty of the skirt at all. It was like a short skirt that had been cut short, but it gave off a different feeling. It was pleasing to the eye. Vanessa turned around to look at Harris and joyfully said, "This is the most beautiful and refreshing appetizer I've ever eaten." Harris smiled and was satisfied with Vanessa's comment. Now, let me try the husband and wife lung slice. Vanessa's gaze landed on the plate of husband and wife lung slice, which was only half a plate left. When the judges heard that she wanted to taste it, they reluctantly put down their chopsticks and gave her 5 or 6 slices. The bright red oil was the most beautiful color in her eyes. Ever since her teeth recovered, she was completely addicted to spicy hot pot. If she didn't eat hot pot for a day, she would feel uncomfortable all over. Moreover, because of her love of insanely spicy hot pot, she had gained a little fame in the hot pot circle and was known as Little Chili. She liked this nickname. It gave her a sense of accomplishment. No one had ever given her a nickname since she was young. Tripe. Vanessa's gaze was fixed on the remaining piece of tripe. She impatiently picked it up with her chopsticks and scrutinized it before her eyes. The bright red oil was the most beautiful coat, and the densely packed tripe looked quite beautiful, emitting a tempting spicy smell. It tastes different from hot pot tripe, but it's just as tempting, Vanessa muttered before putting the tripe into her mouth with a solemn expression. The familiar red oil taste was naturally much milder compared to the insanely spicy hot pot, but the spiciness wasn't weak. It was still rich. When her teeth bit into the tripe, the springiness brought about by the bite made her eyes light up. Unlike the thin and crispy tripe, the slightly thicker tripe had a pleasantly surprising texture. It was crispy and springy, bringing about a wonderful chewing experience. The braised tripe had a stronger fragrance than the tripe, and the more one chewed, the more fragrant it became. Vanessa felt that the world had suddenly become quiet, and she was the only one left, enjoying the happiness brought about by chewing the tripe to her heart's content. Gulp! Everyone looked at the blissful Vanessa and couldn't help but swallow their saliva, feeling a little stifled. This tripe is really on the same level as the tripe in hot pot. It's so delicious that I don't know how to describe it. It's just like... Vanessa opened her eyes and looked at the expectant faces of the crowd. She blushed and thought for a while before her eyes lit up. Just like the tripe, everyone immediately burst into laughter. She was really a beautiful and cute girl. Vanessa stuck out her tongue a little embarrassedly, but that was the only adjective she could find. After eating a piece of tripe, Vanessa sensibly put down her chopsticks and retreated into the crowd. Anyway, as long as there was a new product, Mr. Mac definitely wouldn't hide it. She would eat to her heart's content when a new product was released. However, before she left, she couldn't help but look at Meg curiously and ask, "Mr. Mac, this husband and wife lung slice doesn't have husband and wife in it, and there's no lung slice either. Why did it use this name?" Everyone looked at Meg curiously when they heard that. This was also a question that everyone was curious about. Although the regulars of Amy's knew that Mr. Mac's dish names had always been strange, such as Beijing roast duck and Yangzhou fried rice, they couldn't understand it at all. However, this time, it was a little too ridiculous. Just like how the bass button can be used to catch any fish other than bass, there's no fish in the eggplant with garlic sauce. There's a reason why the name husband and wife lung slice appeared, Meg said with a smile. "Oh," Vanessa replied thoughtfully. "There is indeed no fish in the eggplant with garlic sauce. Congratulations, young friend. You've won the second round," Harris said graciously as he looked at Meg. "Thank you for letting me win." Meg cupped his hands together. He didn't underestimate Harris at all. The reason why he could win this round was that the husband and wife lung slice had played a decisive role. If it had been a similarly bland, cold dish with the 18-year-old girl in front of him, he reckoned that it would have been even colder than the cold dish. Harris's disciples were looking at Meg with nervous expressions now. Although they were very confident in their master, the ability displayed by this young chef really surprised them. It wasn't because they had too much baggage, but because Meg had raised the stakes for today's duel. If their master were to lose, second senior brother, if master were to lose, are we going to call him Great Master? The youngest junior brother asked worriedly. In terms of seniority, that's indeed the case. That senior brother started to pick his nose nervously again. Now that we've each won one round, the winner of this third round, the soup duel, will determine the winner of today's duel. Harris looked at Meg with a smile. No matter who loses this round, we will definitely have a master-disciple relationship today. If you become my master, what do you plan to teach me? Meg pondered for a while before pointing at the plate at the side and saying, "I can teach you how to make this husband and wife lung slice." This was probably the dish where the ingredients were the easiest to obtain. As for the process, it wasn't a problem at all for a chef of Harris's level. In that case, even if I were to lose this third round, I would feel like I profited. Harris smiled, and his gaze gradually became determined. "However, I will still give it my all in this round. If I win, you can learn from me any dish that I know." Chapter 1483. In the textile factory in the north of the city, the tall chimney was emitting dark yellow smoke. In the factory, all the machines were already in operation. The cotton was spun into cotton thread by the machine, and then woven into cloth by the dexterous elves. The factory had already successfully entered its operational state. "Princess, according to your instructions, 300 million copper coins have been bet on Mr. Meg winning at all 10 gambling dens." Captain Ashley looked at Irina and hesitated for a while before saying, "If he loses, will it cause a strain on our military budget? After all, judging from the odds, the gambling dens seem to favor that chef who is going up against him more. If that's the case, it seems like we can get more money," Irina said with a relaxed smile. Captain Ashley looked at Irina's side profile and left the office silently without saying anything else. "That's my man. How can he lose?" Irina said with a chuckle in the empty CEO's office. In the second round, Mr. Mac from Mamie's has won. The news spread to all the gambling dens very quickly. The odds of Meg winning were originally 1, 2, 5, but it immediately dropped to 1, 1, 2. Isn't Master Harris known as the invincible god of cookery? Is he going to lose today? Please don't. I bet all my money on him. If he loses, I won't even have a roof to look for. I bet 100 on Mr. Mac winning just now. Let's see if I can get a free tofu pudding tonight. The gamblers at the gambling dens became restless when they saw the updated odds. Judging from the change in the odds, the gambling dens thought that Mr. Mac from Mamie's had a higher chance of winning. After all, when the news of the competition was released yesterday, the odds of Meg winning were 1, 5. Meanwhile, at the entrance of Mamie's, The atmosphere became a little tense after the big score of both parties reached 1-1. The invincible god of cookery was very famous, and Mamis was also very influential in Chaos City recently. This duel between Harris and Meg was already very interesting to watch, and now that both of them were showing their prowess, everyone was looking forward to the third round, which would be a soup duel. When the two of them were cooking the previous dish, they had already taken the time to simmer the soup in the pot. Meg stood to the side, calm and unruffled. The delicacy was quietly brewing in the old wine jar. Laying out the various ingredients was the most troublesome, but as long as the ingredients were laid out, the next thing to do was to wait. Because time was limited, he couldn't simmer it all afternoon like he usually did. Therefore, he prepared some of the ingredients in advance so that he could cook it in half an hour. Meanwhile, on the other side, Harris appeared to be much busier. His expression was solemn and serious as he carefully concocted this famous dish, sour beef bone soup. As a chef, he was naturally a little proud. This sour beef bone soup was his pride. When he was 18 years old, he rose to fame with his sour beef bone soup in the Roth Empire's southwest county city. Then, he was invited to Isen Castle by the Dwarf King and became a distinguished royal chef. His sour beef bone soup was praised by the king and many distinguished guests. So many years had passed, but when he was mentioned, that sour beef bone soup, which was once hailed as the best soup in the world by the Dwarf King, couldn't be avoided. He took the beef bone, cut it, and put it into the pot. He added a few spices and simmered it for a few hours. Then, he added the pickled radish that he pickled himself and simmered it for an appropriate time. The delicacy was ready. The seemingly simple process contained many changes. First of all, the pickled radish was the soul of this dish. Without it, there naturally wouldn't be that unforgettable sour soup. Time ticked by, and the scene was rather quiet. Everyone was looking at the two chefs. It was a very rare opportunity for most people to be able to watch the process of the chefs cooking at such a close distance. Furthermore, the process of watching the delicacies turn from ingredients into delicacies made people look forward to this dish even more. Ding! The clock that Harris set rang first. Harris turned off the fire and waited for 3 minutes before he reached out to remove the lid. A slightly sour aroma was released instantly. It wasn't the kind of sourness that was bad, but the kind that made people salivate. It filled the entire place instantly. Gulp! The sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard instantly. Everyone couldn't help but stretch their necks to look at the pot. This aroma was a little too delicious and was irresistible. The thick, white beef bone soup was still bubbling. Harris put a wooden spoon into the pot and stirred it twice clockwise. Then he took a white porcelain bowl and scooped up a spoonful of thick, white bone soup with a few pieces of pickled radish in between. After that, he sprinkled some green onions, and a steaming bowl of sour beef bone soup was ready. This smell, Meg's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but look in Harris's direction. Pickled radish soup wasn't something rare to him, but in his impression, he had never seen anyone who could make sour beef bone soup with such an alluring aroma. Anna's little nose twitched, and she softly said, "It smells so good. This Master Harris is really impressive." Yes, what an alluring aroma. It's just like when I see bayberries. I feel like I'm salivating uncontrollably. Yabamiya nodded, but then became a little nervous. Boss won't lose this round, right? Boss took out Buddha jumps over the wall. It's impossible for him to lose. Connie, who was wearing a helmet, squatted behind everyone and calmly said, "That's my master's favorite food. Look at that uncle's hair. Almost all of it has fallen out." If you let him taste Buddha jumps over the wall, personally, I think he might admit defeat on the spot. Everyone in the restaurant looked at the small tuft of hair on Harris's head and naturally thought of those bald uncles who fought over the limited number of servings of Buddha jumps over the wall every day. They almost fought over it. Everyone suddenly felt that what Connie said made a lot of sense, and their moods became relaxed and joyful instantly. Meanwhile, the expressions of Harris's disciples also gradually brightened up. The second round was just an accident, and their master might have underestimated his opponent. However, when it came to soup, they could proudly say, "No one knows soup better than our master." When the sour beef bones soup appeared in the duel, it meant that the competition had ended. See, this is also a competition without any suspense. Our master is still that invincible god of cookery. Of course, he doesn't care about this title. That senior brother raised his hand again and picked his nose with a relaxed and joyful expression. Master is indeed the best. The junior brother also breathed a sigh of relief, and a cheerful smile appeared on his face. He did not want a grandmaster to appear out of nowhere, but if there was a junior brother, it would be pretty good. Chapter 1484. 5 bowls of thick and white sour beef bone soup were placed in the soup bowls. Chapman went forward and placed the bowls of soup in front of the judges. All the judges' attention was completely attracted by the sour soup in front of them. The aroma of the sour beef bone soup wafted over and chased away all the coldness instantly. The sourness made them salivate, and they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. There's nothing more comfortable than hot soup in winter. Michael reached out to pick up the bowl of soup. The slightly hot bowl warmed up his calloused hands. He opened his mouth to blow on the hot air, and then drank a mouthful of soup from the edge of the bowl. The soup that was still slightly hot entered his mouth. The sourness wasn't sharp, and was instead very gentle. It blended perfectly with the rich bone soup, and brought about a very distinct layered feeling. The sourness brought about a pleasant taste experience. The warm soup brought warmth to him. It's still that sour soup that makes one feel happy and warm. Michael drank 3 big mouthfuls of soup before commenting with a smile. This is the soup that should be drunk in winter. It's also the most delicious beef bone soup I've ever had. I think I can still have 2 more bowls after this bowl. After saying that, he lowered his head and continued to drink the soup. He was completely immersed in it. Hill looked at the sour beef bone soup in front of her, and her eyes lit up slightly. She often heard stories about Harris from her grandfather when she was young. He was the only chef that her grandfather would always mention. Every time he mentioned him, he would definitely mention the dish that made him famous, sour beef bone soup. Harris came to Chaos City 5 years ago, and she was fortunate enough to attend that gathering with her grandfather. The people who were present were the judges today, as well as the Lord of the Great Temple, Roland, and the others. It was also winter that year. That was the first time she tasted sour beef bone soup. That wonderful taste was still lingering in her mind even after 5 years. And now, there was a bowl of sour beef bone soup in front of her again. There were a few fresh green onions floating in the thick and white sour soup, and a few pieces of dark yellow radish floating in the soup. The sour taste of the pickled radish mixed with the rich aroma of the beef bone. It was an aroma that made one's soul feel warm. The simple ingredients and cooking method allowed the wonderful taste of the ingredients to blossom in the ingenious collision. Hill picked up the spoon and gently pushed aside the green onions before scooping up a spoonful of soup. The thick and white soup originated from the beef bone. It was also because of the sour soup that it was so rich. Hill opened her cherry lips slightly and blew on the spoon gently before putting it into her mouth. It was a familiar taste. The mild sourness had a hint of sweetness. The aroma of the beef bone was mellow and wonderful in the soup. It was like soaking in warm spring water. His body and soul were completely relaxed, and his body and soul were both stretched. But there were some changes. It's a warm taste that made me want to immerse myself in it. Of it. You were still a little girl the last time we met, Harris said with a smile. But I was still captivated by this sour beef bone soup. Hill also smiled. She scooped up another spoonful of soup and blew on it elegantly before putting it into her mouth. She continued to enjoy the simple bliss brought by this bowl of soup. He received high recognition from the 2 judges. It seems like Master Harris will win this round with his signature dish. That might not be the case. Mr. Mac hasn't served his dish yet. You guys don't know what kind of divine dish Buddha jumps over the wall is. I heard that a prisoner in the Batai prison next door couldn't help but jump over the wall after smelling the Buddha jumps over the wall. It was all for the sake of eating. Buddha jumps over the wall. The audience discussed softly. Michael and Hill both gave the sour beef bone soup a very high evaluation. While making people curious about the real taste of the sour soup, they also had different opinions about the direction of this competition. Miss Hill's evaluation is warm and blissful. It seems like this bowl of sour beef bone soup is really delicious. Vanessa smacked her lips and swallowed her saliva secretly. It was a pity that she no longer had an official status to taste it. Although the sour soup is delicious, Mr. Mac's dish is Buddha jumps over the wall. That's going to be interesting. Abraham looked at the Shaoxing wine jar in front of Meg with a smile. He would occasionally order a cup of Buddha jumps over the wall to taste. Even he didn't dare to eat such a nutritious thing every day. However, after he came to Chaos City, his body became healthier day by day, and some of his minor ailments were cured unknowingly. This is the most exciting duel I have ever seen. It's better than any duel I have ever seen in books, Vanessa also said excitedly. Jeffrey drank a mouthful of soup and then used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of pickled radish. He took a bite, and a smile appeared on his face. The soft radish almost melted in his mouth. The sourness was almost diluted by the soup, and then soaked in the beef bone soup. It was sour and sweet, and still a familiar taste. About 30 years ago, he and Ian went to Issencastle to discuss a business deal. They were still partners then, but they didn't expect to encounter robbers outside Issencastle. His entourage was killed, and all his money was robbed. He was even beaten half to death. It was Ian who dragged him into Issencastle. With no one to turn to for help, they collapsed on the icy streets. When they woke up, they were lying in a rather luxurious room. A young man brought them 2 bowls of soup. It was a warm soup that emitted a tinge of sourness. That was the most delicious soup he had ever tasted in his life. It was sour and sweet and had a rich bone aroma. After drinking it, he only felt his cold body become warm, and the pain in his body was greatly soothed. That young man was Harris. He didn't have many friends when he first arrived at Issencastle. When he saw the 2 of them lying on the streets, he got someone to bring them back to his residence. If it wasn't for that bowl of soup, there wouldn't be the Aden Chamber of Commerce later on, and there wouldn't be the Buffett banks that were all over the Norland continent now. He would never forget the taste of that bowl of soup for the rest of his life. Hence, even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, he still appeared here when the invitation was sent to him and acted as a judge for him. "Good soup," Jeffrey said as he looked at Harris. Jeffrey said to Harris as he looked at him. It was just like how he said those 2 words when he couldn't find the right words to express his gratitude after drinking that bowl of soup back then. Of course, Harris also replied with a smile, just like how he answered back then. Robert tasted a mouthful of the sour soup and couldn't help but praise. The pickled radish stimulated the consistency of the bone soup and also made the originally tasteless bone soup colorful. Be it the layering or the taste, it's amazing. It's also a top-grade soup. Meanwhile, Novin had already finished the soup in his bowl. He put the bowl down and gestured to Harris. "Another bowl? Your request is a little too much." Harris scoffed as he scooped another bowl of soup for him with the spoon. "Ah, I really want to drink this sour beef bone soup." Everyone had already swallowed their saliva countless times as they stared at it. They only felt sourness in their hearts and mouths. This bowl of sour beef bone soup brought about endless reverie in everyone's mind. "This soup should be the best in the world, right?" someone said softly. Right at this moment, Meg's bell also rang. Meg switched off the fire and picked up a small hammer to break the seal of the wine jar. He then slowly lifted the paper seal. A rich, meaty aroma suddenly appeared and then swept in all directions like a wave. Chapter 1486. This is the people who were indulging in the wonderful experience brought about by the sour beef bone soup could not help but look at Meg. The rich aroma surged over and almost instantly covered the aroma of the sour beef bone soup. The extreme freshness of the seafood, the rich aroma of the meat, the refreshing aroma of the mushrooms, and the faint aroma of the wine. All the scents mixed together and brought about an incredible aroma that made people indulge in it instantly. The noise gradually stopped. The audience looked at the wine jar in front of Meg and could not help but swallow their saliva. What was in that jar? Why was it giving off such an alluring aroma? Even the aroma of the sour beef bone soup was completely suppressed. Michael could not help but put down the bowl in his hand. He looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Mr. Mac really brought out the Buddha jumps over the wall. Is this the legendary Buddha jumps over the wall?" I didn't expect the aroma to be so alluring. Hillspoon could not help but stop as she looked at Meg with astonishment. She was not considered a regular customer of the restaurant. After all, there were hundreds of people lining up at Mamie's, and Meg was famous for being a stickler for rules. She was not willing to waste an hour or two waiting in line just for a meal. However, she had heard people talking about Buddha jumps over the wall recently. Mamie's was already famous in Chaos City's rich circle, and she had heard people talking about it on many occasions. But now, it seemed that this aroma had exceeded her expectations. The black pepper steak had given her a surprise before, and this Buddha jumps over the wall seemed to be something else as well. Chapman looked at Meg and the wine jar in front of him in shock. He was puzzled. This aroma is so special. How many ingredients did he put in this jar? And how did he make them complement each other and not mess up? The sour beef bone soup pursued the extreme simplicity. His master only put pickled radish and beef bones in the soup and then sprinkled some salt. There were not too many seasonings, and there were no other ingredients to make a simple and delicious bowl of soup. However, the soup that Meg made was the complete opposite. All kinds of ingredients, exotic delicacies, and even wine were placed in a jar and cooked just like that. According to her master's philosophy, the ingredients would clash with each other and the taste would offset each other. No matter how precious the ingredients were, if they were carelessly piled together, the only result would be a pot of terrible food. However, Meg's pot of soup completely overturned this concept. The rich ingredients did not become a shackle to each other. Instead, they complemented each other, giving the aroma a rich sense of layering. It made people search for the familiar sense in the aroma, as if they were looking for treasures, trying to guess what they were. Many of Harris's disciples had the same confused expression on their faces. At the same time, there was an additional hint of worry on their faces. "It smells so good. Senior brother, is there really no problem with this fragrance? I feel that Master's sour beef bone soup has been completely suppressed." The junior brother whispered, "Could he know more about soups than Master? Impossible." That senior brother quietly put down his hand that was digging his nose. His expression was slightly unnatural, and he was a little flustered. This fragrance isn't a little too overboard? Just the fragrance alone was already very alluring. Be it seafood soup, freshwater seafood soup, mushroom soup, meat soup, all of them could form a pot of soup on their own. However, there is actually someone in this world who put all of them together to stew. Moreover, the most infuriating thing was that it could be stewed so fragrant and alluring that the aroma wafted everywhere. Although his master was still the best in his heart, it was undeniable that this rich fragrance still made him a little flustered. You have to believe in Master. Even if he really loses, we don't have to call him Great Master, that senior brother consoled. That might not be the case. We have always been the scapegoat. The junior brother sighed softly. However, his gaze gradually became determined, and he seriously said, "The fragrance of the soup is not enough. Master sour beef bone soup does not rely on the fragrance to win. I don't believe that there's a soup more delicious than sour beef bone soup in this world." "Yes, junior brother, you are right. We have to believe in Master." The senior brother beside him nodded in agreement. "Let me see what it smells like." Harris closed his eyes and took a deep whiff of the fragrance in the air. He could clearly distinguish the fragrance of all the ingredients, but there were some that even he didn't know what they were. However, that didn't affect his ability to analyze the fragrance. He separated the mixed fragrances one by one, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "Those that fly in the sky, those that swim in the sea, those that grow on the trees, and those that grow on the soil are all here. This combination is amazing." He was indeed a chef who strongly advocated using the original flavor of ingredients to cook, and Meg's pot of Buddha jumps over the wall could be said to be a textbook example of the original flavor of cooking. The rich fragrance didn't come from the condiments. Instead, it was presented after the fragrance of all the ingredients blended together. It was perfectly blended to create a wonderful fragrance. It was like the most perfect work of a master of seasoning. No matter which one was missing, the balance of the flavor would be destroyed, and no other flavors could be added. This is a genius among the seasoners. Harris looked at Meg with admiration in his eyes. To be able to have such achievements and abilities at such a young age, even he couldn't compare to him back then. Just the cover of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall had already caused quite a commotion. Meg was rather calm about that. He picked up the spoon and scooped the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall into the ceramic bowl in the tray. Yabamiya walked up and carried the tray to the judge's table. He placed a bowl of soup in front of every judge and held the tray by his side. He nodded slightly and said, "Please enjoy." The judge's attention was already attracted by Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. Apart from Robert and Michael, the other three had never tasted Buddha Jumps Over the Wall before. The brown soup was steaming hot, and the faint aroma of wine wafted into their noses. The fragrance of all the ingredients was competing with each other and made everyone's eyes light up. They couldn't help but want to explore it. Apart from a portion of the restaurant regulars, most of the audience present today were just passers-by. They had long heard that Amy's had a supreme-grade soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. They didn't expect to see it in today's duel. Their interest was piqued immediately. Master Harris's famous dish versus the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. Who would win? Robert scooped up a spoonful of soup, blew on it, and put it into his mouth. Then he closed his eyes subconsciously. His expression gradually became interesting, and a blissful and surprised smile appeared on his face. After a long while, he opened his eyes reluctantly and praised, "This Buddha Jumps Over the Wall seems to contain thousands of changes. Every time I taste it, I can always find an additional surprise. The combination of all the ingredients is wonderful to the extreme. After swallowing it, I still have an endless aftertaste. If sour beef bones soup brings me warmth and bliss, then Buddha Jumps Over the Wall will bring me endless reveries and wonderful experiences in the sea of delicacies. It might bring a brand new culinary mindset to the culinary world. Hence, I choose Buddha Jumps Over the Wall." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1487. Mr. Mack gets the first vote. Everyone was in an uproar. They didn't expect President Robert, who was still full of praises for the sour beef bone soup, to choose the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall so quickly. "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly at Robert. "Is it really that delicious?" Jeffrey looked at the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall in front of him doubtfully. However, he still picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth. The delicious soup slowly bloomed in his mouth, and the taste of all the ingredients appeared one by one, overwhelming his taste buds. It was undeniable that it was indeed amazingly delicious. However, to him, such a taste was unavoidably a little too complicated. Even his taste buds were a little tired of distinguishing the different tastes, and he lost the peaceful state of mind to enjoy the food. This is indeed a soup with a rich taste. It's amazingly delicious, and it can also bring a very wonderful experience. Jeffrey put down the spoon in his hand and calmly said, "However, to me, the taste of the sour beef bone soup is irreplaceable. A simple combination, simple warmth, and delicious taste are my choices. Hence, I choose the sour beef bone soup." 1-1 tie. After Jeffrey made his judgment, the score was tied, and the atmosphere became tense. Which of the two soups with different styles would win? Everyone's gaze shifted to the remaining 3 judges. Novin picked up the spoon and drank a mouthful of soup. After savoring the taste for a while, he scooped a piece of chicken from a bowl and put it into his mouth. After tasting it carefully, he smiled and said, "The taste of this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall that Mr. Mack made is indeed amazing. The delicious soup with a rich soul aroma, and the chicken meat that is soft but not rotten. However, I still choose the sour beef bone soup. Drinking a bowl of sour soup like this in the winter can always remind me of some warm memories. It's also an irreplaceable taste in my heart. The sour beef bone soup is in the lead. Everyone was a little surprised. The sour beef bone soup that was suppressed by the Buddha jumps over the wall in terms of fragrance actually took the lead temporarily. It could be seen that the sour beef bone soup was still good in terms of taste. What should we do? Boss Buddha jumps over the wall actually fell behind. Yabamiya said nervously. I suspect they're playing us, Barbara speculated, rubbing her chin. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. With their status, they don't need to do such a thing. The people in the restaurant, who thought that they would be able to rest easy after taking out the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, started to feel nervous. Everyone's eyes fell on Michael and the Hill. The decision was now in their hands. Michael was already savoring the food with relish. He had a mouthful of soup and a mouthful of meat, and the expression on his face was so fascinating that the onlookers couldn't help but salivate. I didn't expect Castellan Michael to be so talented in Mukden, Abraham said with a smile. Uncle, who do you think will win this match? Vanessa asked nervously. Buddha jumps over the wall is the most delicious soup I've ever tasted, and I think it's the pinnacle that can't be surpassed. However, taste varies from person to person. Hence, Principal Novin and Jeffrey chose the sour beef bone soup. As for which one City Lord Michael and Miss Hill will choose, I don't know. Abraham shook his head with a smile and lamented, This is really a fight between the gods. I've never seen such an exciting culinary duel. Vanessa rubbed her head and said, Yes. The two chefs that I like the most are actually dueling on the spot. This is indeed a match that didn't disappoint me. However, the result is still very nerve-wracking. Michael finished half the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup in no time. He couldn't bear to put down the spoon in his hand as he looked at Harris and said, The sour beef bone soup should be the most delicious soup on the Norland continent in the past 30-odd years. Furthermore, it hasn't been surpassed for many years and has always maintained its original flavor. It's been perfected continuously with slight improvements. Until now, it's undoubtedly an amazingly delicious soup. Hence, I choose Buddha jumps over the wall soup. The audience, who thought they were going to announce Harris's victory, were shocked by the Castellan's sudden announcement. 2:2. Even, everyone looked a little nervous, and some were even wiping their sweat. No one would have thought that a culinary duel could make people so nervous. Everyone's gaze landed on the Hill. Now, only the vote in her hand was left to decide the final outcome of this duel. The Hill furrowed her brows slightly. She felt a headache coming on. Why did the decision fall to her again? She suddenly regretted not taking a bite and announcing her choice first. Then, she wouldn't have to have such a headache. However, she quickly calmed herself down. After all, this was a very formal duel, and it also concerned the reputation and even seniority of the two chefs. No matter if it was Harris or Meg, they were both chefs that she respected. She had to get rid of all the subjective factors and make an objective judgment for these two dishes. After getting rid of all the distracting thoughts, her gaze landed on the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup in front of her. There were all kinds of ingredients in the brown soup. Although they had been simmering in a wine jar for a long time, they still maintained the same appearance. The fragrance that drifted over made her eyes light up. Seafood, mushrooms, meat. There were so many fragrances that she couldn't differentiate them one by one. However, this didn't affect her from being intoxicated by the rich layering of the flavors. Different from the taste of the simple sour beef bone soup, the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was like a pot of extremely exquisite hodgepodge. The amount of control and the heat was just right, allowing each flavor to abide by its own territory and reach the pinnacle of freshness. Then they were woven together in a wonderful way, creating such a unique and wonderful taste. Try the soup first. The Hill picked up the spoon and scooped up a spoonful of the brown soup. She blew on it gently before putting it into her mouth. The delicious soup slowly soaked into her taste buds. It was as gentle as a feather, and it moistened her taste buds like the spring rain. All of a sudden, it was as if spring thunder had struck. The freshness of the seafood, the mellowness of the meat, the freshness of the mushrooms. All kinds of flavors appeared one by one. The rich layering of the flavors seemed to be playing an intoxicating symphony on the tip of her tongue. Sometimes it was a light breeze, and sometimes it was a violent storm. Her taste buds went crazy. This is an incredible flavor. It's amazing and admirable. The hill couldn't help but exclaim in admiration after swallowing a mouthful of soup. Looking at the translucent shark's fin floating in the soup, she couldn't help but scoop up a piece out of curiosity. The soup had given her a great surprise. She wondered what the shark's fin would be like. Slurp. The smooth shark's fin slid into her mouth and was soaked in the soup. It had a very wonderful texture. It was soft and tender, but it was full of meaty flavor. Before she could chew, it slid down her throat after one round in her mouth. She swallowed it after rolling her throat. The hill touched her throat with a slightly strange expression. This strange texture. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1488. Hill didn't have time to savor the shark's fin that slid down her throat. However, the smooth feeling spread from her throat to her stomach and brought about a very amazing eating experience. She couldn't help but smile. Watching Hill eat gracefully was a kind of enjoyment for the people present, but it was also a kind of torture. With her status, ordinary people could hear many legendary stories about her, but it was hard for them to come into contact with her. However, when it came to enjoying delicious food, everyone's impression was the same. Joy and enjoyment made the people who were watching couldn't help but smile. Amazing shark's fin, Hill thought to herself. Then, she scooped up a piece of chicken with anticipation. The ordinary-looking chicken was light brown in color after being soaked in the broth. It looked very appetizing. She then put it into her mouth. She bit into the chicken gently, and it didn't have the expected mushy texture. Instead, it had the perfect amount of tenderness and smoothness. What was even more incredible was the rich meaty taste that came with it. It wasn't just the taste of the chicken. The aroma of wine, seafood, mushrooms, and all kinds of meats had all merged together and permeated the chicken perfectly. There was flavor within flavor, and it was mushy but not mushy when chewed. There was a rich aftertaste. Unlike the shark's fin, which she didn't have time to savor, the deliciousness of the chicken stimulated her taste buds continuously during chewing, bringing about a wonderful carnival. Hill felt her scalp turning numb. This was unbelievable. How did the chicken taste so delicious? It was mixed, but not greasy, and there was flavor within flavor. It completely overturned her impression of chicken. Under the influence of the broth, it was sublimated and obtained an unparalleled deliciousness. It was a taste that could make one go crazy. After swallowing the chicken, the aroma lingered in Hill's mouth for a long time. He restrained his urge to continue eating and put down the spoon in his hand gracefully. With a sincere expression, he sincerely said, "Master Harris's sour beef bones soup brings warmth and happiness to the winter, and also brings hope to people. It has an irreplaceable position in soups." Meanwhile, Mr. Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall made me experience an unparalleled deliciousness. The broth's scrumptiousness is astounding, and the food in the broth is so delicious that it makes one sink into it. Hill paused and looked at Meg and Harris with hesitation. Who will it be? The audience also held their breaths as they looked at Hill nervously. Meg was smiling on the surface, but he was actually a little panicky on the inside. If he lost, many of his plans would be aborted, and he would have to consider how to face this cheap master. As for Harris, he also had a smile on his face. However, his slightly raised little finger and revealed that he wasn't as calm as he looked. Amy's and Harris's and Harris's aunts and Meg's aunts Meg. Meg's says Meg's is Meg to herself. All the best, Mr. Mag. TSSSSS to make it. Of TSSSS. S's of SSSSS Estes. Meanwhile, Harris's disciples all looked rather nervous. After all, if their master lost, they would have a 30-year-old grandmaster out of nowhere. He was even younger than their eldest senior brother. The Hill pursed his lips and remained silent for a while before he said, "This is a very complicated choice, but I have to make a choice. After careful consideration and comprehensive consideration, I choose Mr. Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall." "We won." Amy's staff immediately cheered. "We're done for." Meanwhile, Harris's disciples looked at each other and didn't know what to say. The undefeated record of the invincible god of cooking has been ended. Mr. Mac's Buddha jumps over the wall is indeed better. This victory belongs to Mamis. Mr. Mac has shown off his skills and gained a disciple. He's earned a lot. The crowd was in an uproar. Hill's choice meant the end of the match. Meg won the soup showdown with a total score of 2-1. The regulars at Amy's cheered and applauded. The strong sense of honor made them excited and joyful as they shared the honor. This is a battle of great significance. Perhaps it will be seen as the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. In the past 30 years, Master Harris was almost the representative of the challenging chefs. He stood at the peak of the world of chefs with an undefeated record. And now, Mr. Mac may become a new legend because he's still very young. Vanessa said excitedly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She never thought that she would be able to witness this duel with her own eyes and even participate in it. Indeed, he's already standing at such a high position at such a young age. I wonder what he'll achieve in the future. Abraham nodded in agreement as he looked at Mag with admiration in his eyes. Harris smiled when he saw this. He had always felt that he didn't have the burden of being the invincible god of cookery. He didn't want to prove himself every time he challenged. Instead, he wanted to improve and improve through sparring with different chefs so that he could reach a higher level of delicacies. However, when he really lost, when the applause wasn't for him, he still felt a little disappointed for some reason. "Are you a sore loser?" Harris thought to himself in a self-mocking manner. Meg stood there and looked at Harris, who was smiling with a hint of loneliness, with a complicated look in his eyes. There wasn't much joy, and he didn't think that his culinary skills were far better than Harris's. Harris was a real chef. He had a well-rounded technique and a chef's heart that constantly chased after delicacies of a higher level. If he hadn't been instilled with the experience of countless chefs, if he hadn't had the test field for the god of cookery, where he could practice countless times without stopping, or if he hadn't brought out the Buddha jumps over the wall today, he might still have been the one who lost this duel. He was only a chef who had learned how to cook a few dishes now. He still had a long way to go before he could become a real chef who could create all kinds of delicacies. However, he still won this duel in the end. What he needed to think about now was how to elegantly remind Harris that he had lost, and that it was time for him to call him Dad. "No, Master. Harris, aren't you going to try this Buddha jumps over the wall yourself? Apart from being delicious, isn't the most powerful effect of this soup to grow hair? It's also known as hair growth soup," Michael said to Harris with a smile. Chapter 1489. Hair Growth Soup. Harris was taken aback. His eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "You're saying that after drinking this soup, my soft and silky hair will grow out again? And my handsome face will be radiant again?" "Hair can grow out, but if you want to say that your handsome face will be radiant again, you have to have it before," Michael said. "That's not important." Harris turned his head and stared at the altar of Buddha jumps over the wall beside Meg. He rushed forward, looked at Meg, and said, "Young friend, does your Buddha jumps over the wall really have the effect of hair growth?" "Practically speaking, that's indeed the case." Meg nodded and said, "So far, Buddha jumps over the wall has already solved the problem of baldness for many middle-aged and young people." "It's true." Harris's voice dragged out as he looked at Meg with glowing eyes and said, "Then, can you give me a bowl too?" Mag murmured. He hesitated as he looked at Harris, who was full of anticipation. "Didn't we agree, just now? Whoever loses will call the other party master." Harris looked at Meg, cupped his hands, and said, "I'm willing to accept my loss, Master. It's over. It's really over this time." The senior brother who was picking his nose earlier collapsed in his junior brother's arms. Senior brother, you have to be strong. Master has already called you master. What else can we do? The junior brother put him down on the ground silently and consoled him. Huh? Meg looked at Harris, who called him master, and didn't know how to respond for a moment. Ding! Congratulations, host. You have won the culinary duel and successfully accepted a disciple. Mission completed. Reward received. Great teacher talent point +1. Midas touch and lightning skill. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Mag's mind. A cool and refreshing feeling exploded in Mag's mind, as if his spirit had been elevated to a higher level. At the same time, a shiny golden skill treasure chest appeared. Meg's eyes lit up. He felt that he had obtained something, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He smiled at Harris and said, "You don't have to be so polite, my disciple." Harris and Meg were stunned at the same time. Why is it so natural for me? Meg's expression was a little strange. Why is he so skilled? Could it be that they've rehearsed this many times? Harris also criticized in his heart. Come. Master doesn't have anything to entertain you with. This bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup is a greeting gift. Meg picked up a big bowl, filled it to the brim with Buddha jumps over the wall, and handed it to Harris with a benevolent smile. He had a rough idea now. The so-called great teacher talent points were probably to allow him to quickly adapt to the role of a teacher. Harris, who had wanted to complain, swallowed his words when he saw the Buddha jumps over the wall. He carefully received the big bowl and didn't forget to thank his master. When the crowd saw this sudden turn of events, they were all stunned. Originally, they were still lamenting the end of the invincible god of cooking and were excited about the rise of a new god of cooking. They didn't expect the two of them to get into the mood so quickly and have already started to show their deep relationship in front of them. What's going on? Are all experts so resistant to attacks? I've long heard that Master Harris doesn't care about fame and fortune. I used to think that it was more of an exaggeration. Now it seems like it's most likely true. I suspect that they are acting us. Many people didn't know how to express their emotions all of a sudden. Should we call him Grandmaster or Grandmaster? No matter what we call him, I find it very strange. It's all right. We can even call him Master. Why do we still need the burden of being an idol? Harris's disciples had a brief conversation. Grand Disciple Chapman greets Grandmaster. Chapman went forward and bowed respectfully. Meg chuckled and said, "You don't have to be so courteous. Grandmaster doesn't have any greeting gifts to give you. Come forward. Each of you has a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall as a greeting gift." Harris's disciples had weird expressions. However, since their master had already acknowledged him, and their eldest senior brother had also acknowledged him as their grandmaster, they couldn't hold back. Hence, they could only go forward a little bashfully. Of course, everyone was also curious and indignant. They wanted to try what kind of soup could defeat the sour beef bone soup that their master was most proud of. At the side, Harris had already carried the big bowl to a dining table. He placed the big bowl down, sat down at the table, and tidied his clothes before picking up a spoon. The rich aroma rose with the steam. It was even clearer and richer than when they were standing far away. However, that wonderful balance was still maintained. As a chef, he naturally had his pride. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make food that satisfied him. He also wanted to know what kind of soup could be deemed as surpassing sour beef bone soup. The white spoon scooped up a spoonful of thick soup. Although the soup was brown in color, it was still clear and didn't have any crumbs of ingredients in it. To be able to ensure that even with so many different ingredients, his understanding and control of the ingredients was indeed very strong. After blowing on the hot air, Harris put the soup into his mouth. All kinds of flavors blossomed on the tip of his tongue. Every taste quickly materialized into a physical object in his mind. Abalone, shiitake mushroom, chicken, shark's fin, pigeon's egg. His mind had almost materialized into a paradise of animals and plants. The rich, meaty aroma blended into this mouthful of soup, but it was meaty without being greasy. The wonderful taste tickled his taste buds. It was like a graceful young girl who knew all kinds of tricks, bringing different surprises at all times. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Harris sighed softly in his heart. This wonderful taste was indeed much better than the sour beef bone soup. Regardless of whether it was the combination of ingredients, the control of the fire, or the amazing cooking method, they all made him feel novel and powerful. He admitted defeat wholeheartedly in today's duel. However, this also gave him more thoughts and new cooking directions. The collision of ingredients that didn't differentiate between types could perhaps create an amazing delicacy. The soup stayed in his mouth for a while before sliding down his throat. It turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs and bones. Meanwhile, a ball of hot air suddenly rose and rushed straight to the top of his head. Harris only felt a buzz in his head. His head felt a little hot, and his scalp started to feel numb. It was as if there were ants crawling on his head, or as if there was suddenly grass trying to push open the dry soil in a barren desert that had been barren for many years and emerged from the ground. Is this growing hair? Harris was dumbfounded as he felt something trying to break out of the shell above his head. This wasn't just medicine. It was a special medicine. Chapter 1490. The Invincible God of Cookery. Harris lost 2-1 to Mamie's Mr. Mac. The news quickly spread to all the gambling dens in Chaos City and caused a commotion. Nothing major had happened in Chaos City recently. So many people had placed their bets on this duel. Now that the results were out, it naturally caused quite a commotion. The Invincible God of Cookery was very famous, and he had never lost before. Hence, many people had placed their bets on him, but they didn't expect him to lose to the boss of Mamie's. However, the gambling den owners who usually made a lot of money from unexpected upsets were all feeling melancholy now. Sigh, why is there such a weird person? He actually bet 30 million on the boss of Mamie's. I'm going to lose my underwear now. A bald boss sighed with a melancholy expression. Although the odds had been lowered when the bet was placed, the 3 times real time odds were still worth 60 million. Although he had received quite a lot of bets for this duel today, it couldn't reach 60 million no matter how he added it up. He still had to lose 30 million. Boss, do you think they're faking the duel and acting as us? A lackey reminded him. Yeah, otherwise, how could it be so coincidental that someone placed a 30 million bet before the duel? This is the first time our gambling den has seen something like this. Another person chimed in. The bald boss frowned and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, That's really possible. I want to see who dares to play this game in my Hualaoers territory. I must break his legs. The same thing was happening in all the gambling dens in Chaos City. Unlike normal gamblers who had lost their bets, the gambling den owners were all thinking about how to cash in that huge sum of money. After downing a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall, Harris was already sweating profusely. His face was flushed, and there was even a cloud of white mist rising from the top of his head. He did look like an expert. However, he couldn't care less about showing off his value as an expert now. He couldn't wait to touch the top of his head. His wet head looked as if he had just washed it. The few strands of hair that were left stuck to his scalp. What surprised him was that there were some thin and short hairs on the top of his head that was originally as smooth as porcelain. It really grew out. Harris had a look of disbelief on his face. How many years had it been? His smooth hair started to fall off rhythmically 30 years ago. It started from the top of his head and gradually spread outwards until it covered the entire top of his head. As a man who used to call himself the most handsome man in the world of chefs, Harris naturally couldn't accept this fact. During his years of traveling around the Northern continent, he had tried many hair growth recipes, but apart from accelerating hair loss, he couldn't find any effective way to stop hair loss, let alone trying to grow hair again. However, he did not expect that after drinking this bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup, his hair actually grew out. This kind of excitement made it hard for him to control himself. How does it taste? Meg asked with a smile. He had already gotten used to his elated state and restrained himself a little. After all, Harris's experience and age were there for all to see. He didn't have a cheek to put on airs and treat himself as a master. Master, if you had told me earlier that you had such a miraculous medicine, we wouldn't have had a duel. We could have just gone through the apprenticeship process. Harris looked at Meg with a resentful expression as if he was blaming Meg for hiding the treasure. Meg shrugged helplessly. Harris looked at the crowd that had yet to disperse and loudly said, "Thank you for coming to today's duel. I am Harris, and I am willing to accept my loss. I will acknowledge the owner of Mamie's, Mr. Meg, as my master." Meg also stopped smiling and cupped his fist at Harris. "Thank you for letting me win. I don't dare to call myself your master. I still have many things to consult you on." There was a moment of silence in front of the restaurant before a round of enthusiastic applause sounded. Everyone looked at Harris and Meg with respect in their eyes. These were two real chefs who appreciated each other. Winning or losing didn't seem to be that important anymore. How could one duel determine who was better in culinary skills? Michael glanced at the clock at the side. It was already 11 a.m., and he smilingly said, "Mr. Mack, I think it's almost lunchtime. Why don't you let us in for lunch? I've long heard that Mamie's tofu pudding has become the beauty panacea for women in Chaos City. I wonder if I have the chance to try it today." The Hill also smilingly said to Meg. Robert added, "Come to think of it, I haven't been to Mamie's for a while. I heard they have released many new products recently. I have to try them." The audience who were about to disperse also stopped in their tracks upon hearing that. They were indeed a little hungry after watching such an exciting duel and going through so many challenges. Mamie's was a pretty good choice for lunch, so they might as well stay and try the delicacies cooked by this local chef who had just defeated the invincible god of cookery. With the status of the judges, they would be treated with the highest level of respect wherever they went in Chaos City. It was a very reasonable request for them to put aside their work to come and be the judges, and asked to have lunch before leaving. Meg looked at everyone with a smile and said, "I've troubled all of you to come here for lunch. However, there's still some time before the restaurant's opening hours, so the restaurant needs to do some preparations before opening. If you don't mind, you can line up and wait for a while. The restaurant will officially open for business at 11:30 a.m. He's actually refusing to let the judges have lunch in advance. The people who didn't know the restaurant's rules looked at Meg with astonishment. Someone would actually refuse City Lord Michael, Hill Buffett, Jeffrey, Novin, and Robert, and make them line up for lunch? This boss is too crazy, isn't he? Mr. Mack is indeed Mr. Mack. The regulars of the restaurant revealed a knowing look on their faces. The god of fire and the lord of ice were always queuing up outside the restaurant. That's a very reasonable request. Then, let's wait for a while, Michael said with a smile. He stood up and walked to the restaurant's entrance. He stood in front of the door and stood at the front of the line. As a father who had to accompany his daughter to the restaurant for spicy grilled fish every now and then, he also knew the restaurant's rules very well and agreed that such rules brought convenience and comfort to the dining experience. Delicacies are worth the wait. Hill also walked over with his long legs and stood 1 meter behind Michael. It's rare to have the chance to line up so close to the front. Seems like I made the right choice to come today. Robert stood behind Hill with a smile. If I remember correctly, you can line up twice. Principal Novin chuckled and stood beside Michael. Jeffrey stood up and was about to leave when Harris pulled him back with a smile. "Jeffrey, don't run away. We haven't seen each other for years. Let's go and try my master's cooking and have a few more drinks." Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1491. Silly, children can't drink alcohol. Smell this soup. It's cooked with alcohol. It's not nice. Come, let me share your burden. Little fatty, stop eating. Look at your tummy. It's almost as big as that pot on your back. Master will help you drink this soup. Master is doing this for your own good. Slowly. You took so long just to drink a mouthful of soup. If you finish this bowl of soup, you'll lose half an hour of your life. Let Master bear the rest of the soup for you. Anyway, Master has already enjoyed everything. It doesn't matter if you waste a little of your life. Harris walked among his disciples and cheated a few more bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall shamelessly. The crowd that had already started to line up looked at Harris whose face was flushed red. There was a cloud of white fog above his head that didn't dissipate for a long time. His bald head was now covered with a layer of thin, short hair. Why is this master a little different from what I imagined? Master, you seem to have drunk a little too much, the little disciple, Venner, reminded him softly. You're just a child, so you don't understand. This is the effect I want. However, Harris didn't seem to mind. He reached out to touch his head and revealed a blissful smile. After so many years, he could finally have a head of smooth, silky hair again. He could return to being the most handsome chef in the world. The competition took a lot of time. We need to hurry up and prepare. Meg returned to the restaurant and closed the door. He didn't have time to share the joy of winning and quickly walked to the kitchen as he spoke. I will prepare the ingredients very quickly. Phyllis jogged to the kitchen. She took off her apron and put it on. She cleaned her hands and immersed herself in preparing the ingredients. I can help to grind the tofu, Anna said. She had already learned how to operate the bean grinder. Everyone also immersed themselves in their work. To the restaurant, it was very important to open on time. Meg turned around and said, "All right, Mia, find that enlarged version of the menu and put it back at the restaurant's entrance." All right. Mia found a folded, standing menu that was taller than a person from behind the counter. She opened the door and stood at the entrance. She smiled and reminded, "This is the restaurant's menu. First-time customers can understand it first. It will be more convenient to order later." After saying that, she returned to the restaurant. There was already a commotion behind her. The dishes on the menu are so expensive. A single dish can easily cost hundreds or thousands. Buddha jumps over the wall. 10,000 coins per serving. That line is too long. I heard that there's a fish restaurant that's not bad. Why don't we go there and try? Sure, I don't want to wait too long for a meal. When a menu was placed at the door, other than causing a commotion, it also had a good dissuading effect. At the same time, it also avoided the awkward situation of customers lining up for hours, only to enter the restaurant to take a look at the menu but wanting to leave. This Buddha jumps over the wall soup is actually selling for 10,000 copper coins per serving. Grandmaster is really generous. 10,000 copper coins are not enough to measure the value of such a delicacy. I only drank a mouthful. Master drank the rest. I haven't even started drinking yet. Harris's disciples also looked at the menu with astonishment. They had traveled the continent and met many famous chefs with their master. They had also been to their restaurants. It wasn't that they had never seen expensive menus, but it was indeed their first time seeing a soup that was sold for 10,000 copper coins. Furthermore, they even drank it. This is such a worry-relieving miracle medicine. It's worth it even if it costs 100,000 or 1 million copper coins per bowl, let alone 10,000 copper coins. Harris took the towel from Chapman and wiped his wet head with emotion. Although he had a master at his age, his hair had grown back, and he hadn't been as happy as he was today for many years. There was a long line at Amy's in the afternoon, as usual. Some of the regulars who came late could only sigh and leave when they saw the cutoff line at the end of the line. There are so many people today. Amy let go of Crassus's hand and skipped towards the entrance of the restaurant. She looked at the audience who hadn't left yet in shock. She thought for a while and suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked at the crowd curiously and asked, "I heard that there was a little fool who wanted to challenge Father today. Was he beaten away by Father? What a cute half-elf girl. Is she the restaurant owner's daughter?" Many people's eyes lit up when they saw Amy. "Yes, this is the treasure of our restaurant, little boss, the invincible baby Amy," Harrison replied with a nod. "She looks so cute, and she speaks so adorably, too. I want to steal her away," a strange uncle said as he clasped his chest. "You can try, but I have to remind you. Look at that half-bearded old man over there. He's the Lord of Fire, Crassus, little boss's master. Look at that magic potion shop over there. It's opened by the Lord of Ice, Julian. He's also little boss's master," Harrison said with a smile. "Ahem, I was just joking. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it seriously." Everyone was amused by Amy's words, but their gazes couldn't help but land on Harris. That little fool she was talking about was probably Harris. Io, What a cute little elf. She has to be of royal blood to give birth to such a beautiful little elf, right? Harris didn't blush at all when he was called a little fool by a cute little fellow. He looked at Amy with a smile and said, "Little girl, I can see that you have a good bone structure. You have good material to be a chef. I have here, Scram. She's my disciple." Crassus lifted his leg and kicked Harris's butt. He angrily said, "Harris, you've grown up. You even dare to covet my disciple." "Io." Harris jumped. He looked at Crassus with surprise and joy and said, "Grandpa Crassus, why are you here, too?" "My disciple is here. If I'm not here, where am I?" Crassus said with pursed lips. "This beautiful little elf is your disciple?" Harris was a little surprised. He thought for a while and said, "I'm her father's disciple now, and you're the master of her father's daughter. So what should I call you?" Crassus thought for a while seriously, and then said, "Scram." "Oh, so that little fool who came to challenge father is you." Amy looked at Harris in realization. "Little girl, we're in the same generation now. You can call me Little Harris," Harris said with a smile. "No, you'll pull down the average looks of us kids." Amy shook her head seriously. She thought for a while and said, "Or perhaps you can call me Old Harris who just grew hair." Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1492. Harris held his breath as he looked at the serious Amy. He didn't know what expression he should show for a moment. He had just regrown his hair and was about to have a second spring in his life. He didn't expect to encounter such a crisis in the blink of an eye. But looking at the little fellow, he just couldn't get angry. After some serious consideration, it was actually a little fitting. He suddenly felt a little aggrieved. Puffed. This nickname is a little cute. Wow, what a cute nickname. This little boss is so cute. The customers at the door couldn't help but be amused by Amy. This little fellow is really cute. The Hill also looked at Amy with a smile. He had only seen this little girl occasionally when he came to the restaurant previously. She was very cute, and her personality was very interesting. But who could her mother be? To be able to give birth to such a beautiful little elf. Her mother must be a very beautiful elf, right? The Hill thought curiously as a few pre-selected elves popped up in his mind. The first to be eliminated was Princess Irina. Although she was also very beautiful, she was Alex's official partner. After all, it was obviously impossible for her to be with Meg. As for the others, they were also eliminated by her one by one. There wasn't a particularly suitable candidate at that moment. Old Harris, who just regrown his hair, by. "I'll go in first." Amy smiled and waved at Harris. She reached out to knock on the door and then called out. The restaurant's door opened very quickly, and she went in. Not long later, she moved a small stool out with a steaming beggar's chicken drumstick in her hand. She let the aroma spread as she sat down on the steps. She raised the golden-skinned chicken drumstick in her hand and gestured to everyone. She smiled and said, "I have a drumstick to eat." "How?" As she said that, she opened her mouth wide and took a bite of the drumstick. A blissful smile appeared on her little face instantly. She sat on the stool and swayed slightly from side to side, as if she was eating the most delicious food in the world. Gulp, the sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard in the line. Everyone's expressions were helpless with a tinge of desolation. They had already suffered enough in the duel, and they didn't expect to suffer such a blow when they were lining up. "It's too difficult for me," Harrison said worriedly as he touched his stomach. Many guests nodded in agreement. Although watching Little Boss eat was a very appetizing thing, to the customers who had empty stomachs back then, it was simply torture. Meow. Ugly Duckling extended a little pink paw and placed it gently on Amy's leg as it looked at her expectantly. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling and pondered for a moment before tearing off a small piece of chicken and feeding it. "All right, here's a small piece for you. Consider it your lunch today." Ugly Duckling, which had just accepted the chicken excitedly, was immediately taken aback. It looked up at Amy, and its eyes gradually widened. "Are you a demon?" "It's a diet meal. It's all like this. Be good," Amy said with a smile. Then, She continued to gnaw on the drumstick as if no one else was around. The envious customers all turned to look at ugly duckling with pity in their eyes. However, even though this kitten wasn't very big, it was indeed quite fat. It was almost as round as an orange ball. Lunch became a gathering for the seniors like Crassus, Harris, and Jeffrey. Meg naturally didn't have any objections to this. Anyway, someone was paying for it, so it wasn't against the rules. However, Meg didn't release the husband and wife lung slice at noon, nor did he make Buddha jumps over the wall, which still caused many customers to complain. The husband and wife lung slice is still being tested. It will be released officially at a suitable time, Meg replied uniformly. As for Buddha jumps over the wall, it was originally only available at night. After the lunch service ended, Meg walked to the door. Just as he was about to close the door, he saw Harris and his disciples still standing outside. "What are you guys doing?" Meg walked out of the door and looked at Harris with confusion. "We are respecting our master. We saw that master was busy just now, so we didn't come to the kitchen to bid you farewell," Harris said with a smile. "It's just a joke. Master Harris, you don't have to take it seriously. In terms of culinary skills, you are much better than me. In terms of experience, you're even a senior. I can't afford to be called master." Meg quickly waved his hands. He still knew his limits. If he were to really teach Harris how to cook, it would be no different from showing off in front of an expert. That won't do. If you agree to a bet, you have to admit defeat. You won, so you should be my master. Harris shook his head. He looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, "Although there is a hierarchy in cooking, every chef has his or her specialty. It doesn't mean that I'm better than other chefs just because I've been cooking for a longer time. That's not right. Every chef can be my teacher. I learn my culinary skills from them. And from you, I see many things that are worth learning. Hence, this isn't just a bet. I am sincerely seeking your guidance." Meg looked at Harris's serious expression and suddenly thought of a tall, great man. He cupped his hands, bowed slightly, and said, "Please give me your guidance, too." A smile appeared on Harris's face again. He looked at Meg and asked, "I wonder when Master is going to teach me the dish husband and wife lung slice." "Tomorrow morning. I haven't had lunch with the restaurant staff yet," Meg said with a smile. "All right," Harris nodded, and then left with his disciples. Irina was holding a drumstick as she stood behind Meg, and smilingly asked, "Do you feel a little smug after taking in a disciple who is twice your age?" "It's all right. It's a little strange." Meg turned to look at her and smilingly said, "I heard you bet a lot of money on me today." Irina's eyes lit up, and she smilingly said, "I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it. I still have to bring people to collect the money later. I wonder if those gambling dens have prepared the money. I bet $300 million on you." "Oh, $300 million. Meg secretly clicked his tongue. Luckily, he didn't bet on himself. Otherwise, those gambling dens bosses would cry their eyes out. He smilingly said, "Someone who dares to go back on his words shouldn't have been born yet. It's good that they have such awareness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good to make a move when we just arrived at their territory. Let's eat. Everyone is hungry." Meg closed the restaurant's door and walked to the table that was already filled with dishes with Irina. They were too busy in the morning, so lunchtime was pushed back to after business hours. After lunch, Irina brought Phyllis out to collect the money. Phyllis followed behind Irina and nervously asked, "Princess, it's my first time collecting money. How can I make myself look more professional?" "Make it fiercer," Irina casually replied. "Fiercer?" Irina stopped in her tracks and turned to look at Phyllis. "Come, make a fiercer expression for me." Phyllis squeezed out an expression for a long time and finally said aggrievedly, I don't know how." Irina held her chin and thought for a while as she stared at Phyllis. She said, "Just imagine that someone killed me, and you're going to take revenge on her now." Sob, sob, sob. "Princess, don't die, Irina." Chapter 1493. After confirming that Phyllis wasn't up to the task, Irina had no choice but to let her play the role of an attendant and lead her into the first casino. In the bustling casino, gamblers of all races gathered at the gambling tables. Chaos City's unique environment allowed the casino to gather all kinds of gambling methods from all races. After many years of continuous improvement, the gambling methods had become more and more complete, and the casino was full almost every day. "Is this the casino, Princess? It's so scary." Phyllis followed closely behind Irina, and a hint of fear appeared on her face as she looked at the gamblers who were blushing and shouting loudly. "They're just a bunch of useless gamblers. What's there to be afraid of? They're not even as fierce as the biting rabbits in the wind forest after they leave the gambling table," Irina said with a relaxed smile. "When did the rabbits in the wind forest start biting people?" Phyllis was a little surprised. "When they're in a hurry," Irina said calmly as she walked straight to the front desk of the casino. She slammed her hand on the counter and said to the demon in charge of the casino, "I'm here to exchange my money." The demon was initially dozing off, but he was given a fright by the loud slap on the table. He turned around with an enraged expression, and his eyes gradually lit up. What a beautiful elf! He had never seen such a beautiful elf in Chaos City, and he was momentarily stunned by her beauty. "Exchange my money," Irina repeated in a cold voice. Only then did the demon come back to his senses. He didn't think that this beautiful elf would come to the casino to gamble, and it seemed that she had won. He just didn't know how many copper coins she had won. He chuckled and picked up the gambling coupon on the table to take a look, and his eyes widened. He carefully counted the number of zeros behind the 3 twice, and made sure that the bet was 30 million copper coins. The demon looked at Irina again, and immediately stood up with the gambling coupon. He pushed open the door behind him and ran in. As he ran, he yelled, "Boss, the person who bet 30 million copper coins is here. Why does he seem a little scared of you, Princess?" Phyllis looked at the door, slowly closing, and was a little perplexed. "They're not afraid of me. They're just afraid of losing money," Irina said with a smile. She casually glanced at the betting table at the side and the sexy dealer who was shaking the dice online. Then, she took out a Buffett banknote worth 1 million copper coins and handed it to Phyllis. "Go and put this banknote on the 18 o'clock position on that table," she said. "Go and put this banknote on that table." Phyllis took the banknote with both hands. Glancing at the gambling table full of people, and then glancing at Irina, who had no intention of changing her mind, Phyllis had no choice but to force her way in. She then slammed the banknote heavily on the 18 points area. The dealer, who was about to open the dice cup, was stunned. The expectant gamblers were also stunned as they looked at Phyllis. What was this thin and weak elven girl trying to do? Was he here to cause trouble? Sorry, there were too many people, so I accidentally slapped a little too hard. Phyllis panicked when she was stared at by the crowd. She retracted her hand apologetically and revealed the banknote that she had slapped alone on the 18 o'clock area. 1 million copper coins. There was an uproar in the crowd. Although it was not uncommon to see rich people casually throw out millions of gold coins in this gambling house, such a little girl dared to take out 1 million to bet on the lowest probability of 18 o'clock. Even the veteran gamblers who had been in the casino for many years had never seen such a posture. "Did your hand slip?" the dealer asked subconsciously. It was not that the 18 o'clock had not been opened before, but the dice in the casino were specially made, and the number of times they could roll 18 o'clock every day was very limited. After all, 18 o'clock meant that the bet would be 20 times higher. It was inevitable that some gamblers would recklessly bet on 18 o'clock, which was not a good thing for the casino. No, I want to bet on this." Phyllis hurriedly shook her head. She did not know why the princess wanted her to bet on this, nor did she know what it meant. However, since the princess said it was this, then it must be this. Seeing that the crowd's expression was a little strange, she asked again, "Can I bet on this?" "It's not that you can't. You're a customer, so you can bet wherever you want," the dealer hurriedly said. This was a performance of 1 million, which was equivalent to the turnover of this table in the morning. Since such a rich and stupid rabbit had come to the door, there was no reason to let her go. The gamblers looked at Phyllis as if they were looking at a fool. They had been playing here for the whole morning, and they had not seen an 18 o'clock even once. Everyone felt a little distressed when they saw that 1 million had gone down the drain. All right, place your bets. After the countdown of 5, the score will be revealed. The dealer gestured for everyone to take half a step back from the gambling table, and then began to count down. 5 for 12 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock. The gamblers stared at the dice cup with shining eyes and began to shout the number of points they had bet on. It was as long as they shouted loudly enough, the god of luck would come to them. Phyllis was so scared that she shrank to the side and looked at those crazy gamblers with some confusion. She did not know why they were so crazy. 2-1. The dealer opened the dice cup, and everyone's eyes fell on the 3 dice in the cup. 6, 6, 6, 18 o'clock. The gamblers were silent for a moment before they burst into an uproar. They stared at the 3 dice in the dice cup in disbelief. All 3 of them had turned into success, and they were all dumbfounded. Not to mention that 18 o'clock was very rare. The key was that the little girl had just bet 1 million on it, which meant that she would get 20 million copper coins in return for this round. 20 million copper coins. Many gamblers' eyes turned green. They had been playing here for the whole morning, and many people had tried to bet over 18 o'clock, but they did not expect to be bet on by a little girl who did not seem to know anything. The dealer's expression was a little unnatural. After being a dealer for so many years, this was the first time he had seen a customer who bet 18 million copper coins in the first round and actually won. Phyllis looked at the 3 dice in shock for a while. Seeing that the crowd's reaction was a little exaggerated, she carefully said, "If I didn't count wrongly, I won, right?" "Yes, according to the rules, you will get 20 million copper coins." The dealer nodded with a bitter smile. This month's commission was over. Then he said, "Because the amount is too big, please come with me to settle the bill." "Oh." Phyllis followed behind the dealer in a daze. When she squeezed out of the crowd, she did not forget to turn back and apologize to the gamblers whose eyes were glowing with greed. "Sorry, I don't know how to play this. You can continue." The gamblers vomited blood. How could she be so infuriating? A beautiful elf? The demon casino owner took the gambling coupon and walked out aggressively with 5 or 6 tall and strong demon brothers. He wanted to see who had earned 60 million copper coins from him. If it was a scam, don't blame him for not being polite. He reached out and pushed the door open. "Boss, this customer just bet 18 o'clock on the dice. You need to pay her 20 million copper coins," the dealer said quickly when he saw the demon boss pushing the door open aggressively. Chapter 1494. 20 million. The demon boss voice was a little stuttered. It wasn't that he couldn't afford to lose, but to be able to win 20 million just by playing dice and to hit the mark of 18 at that, wasn't this a little too unreasonable? His gaze landed on Phyllis in a flash, sweeping over her like a vicious wolf's gaze. A young elf who looked no more than 13 or 14 years old. Her strength was low, and there was no way she could see through the dice cup. However, 18 wasn't something that could be guessed so easily. To have guessed correctly on the first round, and even bet 1 million, as an old hand, he clearly knew the tricks and tricks hidden here. Daring to play games in his place, they really didn't take him, Beecher, seriously. "She's the one who brought the gambling coupon?" Beecher's voice was cold as he asked the demon who'd just delivered the news. The few demons who'd followed Beecher out had already spread out and surrounded Phyllis, their expressions a little unfriendly. What do you want to do?" Phyllis said a little frantically, her gaze instinctively looking outside. "I brought the coupon, and the elf is also mine. Is there a problem?" Just then, a cold voice rang out. Irina walked forward and looked at Beecher with a somewhat mocking smile. "What? Thinking of reneging on your debt? Someone's causing trouble?" Quite a few gamblers looked over curiously when they heard the voice. They weren't the least bit afraid of things blowing up. The 2 demons blocking in front of Beecher stepped aside, clenching their fists and looking at Irina with unfriendly expressions. They were in charge of holding down the fort, and if anyone dared to cause trouble, they'd teach them a lesson with their iron fists. Beecher turned around and couldn't help but start when his gaze landed on Irina. What a beautiful elf! But what made him even more surprised was that this elf looked vaguely familiar, as if he'd seen her somewhere before, but he just couldn't recall where at the moment. However, Beecher was certain that this elf wasn't on the same level as the little elf over there. He immediately revealed a smile and said, "This guest must be joking. Our gambling house values integrity the most. How could we renege on our debt? However, this wager is a little large, and as the boss, I must also conduct a simple verification. After I've confirmed, I'll hand over the wager in full to you." Gambling houses relied on enough integrity to operate, and if this signboard fell, then there would be no gamblers coming to gamble in the future. The gambling coupon is your casino's. The table and dice are also yours. What more is there to verify? Verify whose fist is harder? Irina glanced at her delicately manicured fingernails and said with some mockery. Irritation flashed through Beecher's tea. This way, but he still smiled as he said, "This way, please, let's go to the VIP area to talk in detail. I still have a lot of gambling houses to collect money from. Either you give me the money now, or you give me the money after I tear down your gambling house." Irina casually picked up a chair, and one of its legs dragged on the ground as she walked toward Berkey. A hint of joy flashed through Beecher's eyes. He had originally been thinking about how to resolve this matter, but he hadn't expected the other party to start stirring up trouble first. He immediately said, seriously, "It looks like this guest isn't here to exchange for gambling capital, but to cause trouble. Since that's the case, in order to ensure the rights and interests of the other guests, I can only bang." Beecher hadn't even finished speaking when the demon bodyguards beside him were all swatted away like flies, including 2 7th-grade demons. Beecher gulped as he looked at the new holes in the ceiling of the casino. He retracted his gaze, and that beautiful face appeared before him, along with that chair that was on the verge of falling apart. Irina. Beecher's meridians were instantly cleared, and a name subconsciously popped up in his mind. Thud. Beecher's legs went soft, and he knelt directly in front of Irina, shouting at the same time, "Princess, spare me. Money Bam! With a crisp sound, the chair fell apart into sawdust that filled the air. Beecher was also sent flying with the sound, embedding himself in the wall on the other side of the casino. The gamblers were dumbfounded, not knowing what was going on. How had the casino's boss been sent flying with a slap? What was this elf's background? Was she so unreasonable? What did he just say? Irina asked. I think he said he'd pay. Phyllis whispered, glancing at Beecher a little pitifully. What an unexpected lack of backbone. Irina casually tossed away the remaining half of the wooden stick in her hand, then looked at Beecher, who was hanging on the wall with half a swollen face and an aggrieved expression, and said, "Be more straightforward next time." Beecher had been plucked from the wall. He covered his swollen face and said in a muffled voice, Hurry and give the money to the princess, hurry." Very quickly, Beecher respectfully presented a banknote worth 120 million copper coins with both hands. Irina took the banknote and casually glanced at it, then looked at Beecher with a smile and said, "The chair's not bad." With that, Irina led Irina away. The crowd of gamblers quietly watched her leave, and only when she disappeared through the door did they gradually become restless. "Boss, who is she?" The demon who reported the news earlier asked in a daze as he covered the half of his face that had lost a few teeth. "Who else could it be?" "That's Princess Irina, you dumb cunt." Beecher kicked that demon to the ground and covered his face with his hands. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. What could he do? He was also in despair. Anyone who met her would be terrified. Princess Irina. Everyone was enlightened and surprised. Indeed, no one dared to provoke that legendary big sister. What surprised them was that she actually bet on that culinary duel. Very soon, the news of Princess Irina massacring the top 10 gambling dens in Chaos City spread all over Chaos City. However, the top 10 gambling dens quickly came out personally to clarify the matter. They denied the fact that they were massacred and congratulated Irina for winning the grand prize. Therefore, Chaos City soon knew that Irina had won 800 million by betting on the culinary duel between the boss of Mamie's and the invincible god of cookery, Harris. "You're the real business prodigy." Meg glanced at Amy, who was happily helping to count the banknotes, and praised Irina, who was sitting at the side eating her pizza elegantly. He also knew that the 300 million was taken from the Demon Island's 10 Kings Palace. Of course, after all, I'm an elf who can earn 100 million just by letting vampires eat grass. Irina said matter-of-factly. She pondered for a while, and then said, now that he has become a progenitor, if he performs again, the ticket price will increase by 10 times. Won't the venue be packed to the brim? Probably. Meg nodded with a weird expression. He sighed silently for that progenitor of vampires who had just become a progenitor. Chapter 1495. Mother, I think you can bring me along when you collect money next time. I'm super fierce. Amy turned around with a bunch of banknotes in her hand. She clenched her little fist and placed it beside her face as she howled super fiercely. That's not a bad idea. Irina nodded seriously. Meg held back his laughter. He felt a little helpless. The little one's howl would probably make those gamblers cry. As for the debt collection effect, it would most likely be negative. The duel between Meg and Harris was like a small stone that was thrown into the peaceful life of Chaos City. It stirred up some waves and became the topic of many people's after-dinner conversations. Meanwhile, the direct impact it brought was that the number of customers who came because of the news increased tremendously. There was already a long queue at the entrance. The restaurant's old customers spontaneously explained the restaurant's rules to the new customers and maintained the order of the queue. Some customers who tried to break the rules and cut the queue to enter the restaurant in advance became much more obedient after being taught a lesson. The queue at the entrance was still very orderly. Due to Amy's, the barren southwest corner of Aiden Square became increasingly prosperous. A few new restaurants opened along the street. Although they couldn't be compared to Mamie's, they still diverted many customers who couldn't afford the high price and couldn't get in the queue because of Mamie's popularity. Boss, when will our restaurant be as popular as theirs? A waiter from a newly opened barbecue restaurant leaned against the doorframe as he looked at the long queue at Mamie's with envy. Wait till we poach their boss over. That boss shrugged. There wouldn't be a second restaurant in Chaos City with such a long queue. I heard the restaurant next door is also planning to make hot pot. The waiter's gaze landed on the restaurant that was under renovation next door. They are really riding on the popularity. I wonder how much of the essence of hot pot they can make, that boss said with a smile. The boss said with a smile. He turned around and glanced at the 2 or 3 tables of customers sitting in his restaurant. He also began to consider the feasibility of changing his restaurant into a hot pot restaurant. Currently, there were already a few restaurants in the Aiden Square that were imitating Mamie's products and making their main dishes. The restaurants that were able to imitate Mamie's products were doing quite well. It was as if they were making a low-quality version of Mamie's products, and the prices were more affordable, which attracted many customers to try the new products. As for the hot pot restaurant, this seemed to be the first one. Miss Reyna, right? Hello, I'm Bennett, the owner of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant. A balding middle-aged man stopped Rena, who was walking towards the dormitory with a basket of vegetables. He politely took off his hat and smilingly said, "Can I have a few minutes of your time for a chat?" Rena was a little surprised that he knew her name. At the same time, she was a little puzzled as to when there was a new Zebra Hot Pot restaurant in Chaos City. However, he was an elder after all. She stopped in her tracks and said, "Please go ahead." Bennett pointed to the resplendent tea room not far away and said, "That tea room over there is also mine. If Miss Reyna doesn't mind, perhaps we can go there and have a cup of hot tea while we talk." "No, thank you. I've sent the groceries home to cook for my mother, and I have to go to work at the restaurant immediately. If you have anything to talk to me about, we can talk here," Rena rejected. A hint of disappointment flashed across Bennett's eyes. However, he continued to smile and said, "If that's the case, then let's talk here. Actually, I'm here to look for Miss Reyna to invite you to be the manager and partner of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant." "Manager? Partner?" Reyna looked at Bennett perplexedly. Bennett nodded sincerely and said, "Yes. I hope to invite you to be in charge of the operation and management of Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant. You can make use of your superb hot pot skills to make Zebra Hot Pot Restaurant the best hot pot restaurant in Chaos City. Furthermore, you don't have to invest any capital, and you can get 30% of the hot pot restaurant's ownership and profits directly. You can become the hot pot restaurant's partner. Raina was slightly taken aback. She understood what Bennett meant and shook her head without much thought. I'm sorry. I'm already working at Amy's now, and I'm not considering changing jobs. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Wait a minute. Bennett quickly called out to Raina. He looked at her and continued. If Miss Raina agrees, you will be given an additional detached house in the city center in the wealthy district. After the hot pot restaurant operates normally, you will be able to earn hundreds of thousands of copper coins in profits every month. This money will allow you to live the life of a wealthy person in Chaos City. It's not as bad as working hard at that restaurant and only earning a few thousand copper coins a month. How's that sound? Managing a restaurant on her own, a detached house in a wealthy district, and a monthly salary of hundreds of thousands of copper coins. To be honest, this was indeed very attractive. After all, Raina's current goal was to save up money and buy a small house in Chaos City that belonged to her and her mother as soon as possible so that they could have a stable home. Now, all she needed to do was nod her head, and she could have all this easily and change the course of her life completely. I'm sorry, but I'm still willing to stay and work at Amy's. All my knowledge and skills about hot pot were taught to me by Mr. Mack. I owe him a debt of gratitude. Goodbye. Raina shook her head without hesitation and then walked past Bennett with her basket. I will give Miss Raina some time to consider. If you have thought it through, you can come to the tea room in front to look for me, Bennett said as he looked at Raina's back. Raina quickened her pace, but didn't reply. She's really a good girl who knows how to repay kindness. Bennett watched as Runa's voice disappeared at the entrance of the alley, and his brows furrowed slightly. After a while, they relaxed slowly, and he smilingly said, However, I won't give up so easily. Raina, why do you look like you have something on your mind? Karen's walked into the kitchen and turned off the tap. She glanced at the water that was almost overflowing from the sink and asked Raina, who was holding a vegetable in her hand. Nothing. I'm just a little distracted. Raina hurriedly shook her head and lowered her head to continue washing the vegetables. Karen stroked Raina's head with heartache and said, You must be too tired. You don't have to come home to cook for me in the future. I'm all better now, and I can take care of myself. It's all right. The restaurant is so close to the dormitory, and I'll be home in no time. Also, my colleagues all go to the ice cream shop downstairs to do their work. I often come back with them, so I'm not tired at all. Raina smiled and shook her head. She looked at Karen's and said, Mother, I like to come home to cook for you. If you don't let me do it, I'll be sad. All right. I'll let you do it. I'll let you do it. Karen smiled helplessly. She knew that this girl was very filial and would definitely be worried about her cooking for herself. After cooking for Karen's, Raina casually ate a few mouthfuls and set off for the restaurant. Raina, I've prepared all the ingredients for the hot pot tonight. See if there's anything else you need to add, Phyllis said to Raina as soon as she walked into the kitchen. Let me do a check. Raina took her apron and put it on and quickly got back to work. Chapter 1496. It's time to eat. Meg took out the last dish, the spicy grilled fish, from the oven and smiled at everyone who was busy in the kitchen. It's going to be very busy tonight, so everyone should eat more, Meg said to everyone with a smile as he placed a piece of fish in Amy's bowl. Thank you, Father. Amy was elated as she poked at the fish with her chopsticks. She brought her mouth to the edge of the bowl and carefully blew on the fish before shoving it directly into her mouth. Ah, it's so delicious, Amy exclaimed with a blissful smile on her little face. Everyone also picked up their chopsticks. Aside from filling their stomachs, the table of delicious food also provided them with an unparalleled experience. Furthermore, it provided them with enough energy for the upcoming work. This was probably the happiest time of the day. Rena ate her food in small bites as she watched everyone enjoy the delicacies and tease her occasionally. She couldn't help but smile at the joyous scene. Even though the work intensity was not low, the happiness and satisfaction of working at Mamie's was completely incomparable to that of her previous jobs. Furthermore, she had received a lot of respect here. After dinner, the busy and long evening business hours began. Mamie's designated hot pot area had already become an existence that was on par with the restaurant popularity. On a cold winter day, there was probably nothing more blissful than sitting around a warm hot pot with 2 or 3 friends. Raina was in charge of the designated hot pot area, and she busied herself in front of the pot for almost the entire night. Pot after pot of hot pot soup was prepared by her hands before being served to each table, becoming the source of delicious hot pot flavor. During her free time, Raina leaned against the wall and wiped the sweat from her forehead with a towel. She then opened her thermos and took a few sips of water. Her gaze fell on Meg, who was still busy in front of the stove. There were 3 iron pots, 2 stew pots, and all kinds of kitchen utensils surrounding him. Furthermore, there was food cooking in each of the pots. He was like a god, easily moving between the various woks. His movements were natural and smooth, making people feel that he was not in a hurry at all. Instead, it was as if they were enjoying a wonderful cooking show. The customer at the new table asked for a portion of insanely spicy. The other table already has 2 portions of clear soup, 3 portions of medium spicy, 3 portions of super spicy, and 1 portion of insanely spicy. Yabamiya walked into the kitchen and said to Raina, who was in a daze, "Oh, okay." Raina immediately put down the cup and went back to work. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the opening hours ended and the guests left. "Thank you for your hard work tonight. I have prepared a fat set meal for everyone. Durian pizza plus beggar's chicken. Have some supper before going home to sleep." Meg walked out of the kitchen with a tray and smiled at the people who were cleaning up the dining room. "Boss, if I eat supper every night, I think I'll get fat very quickly." Yabamiya rubbed her stomach and was a little distressed. "Yeah, I think I'm already getting fat. Do you see my face getting rounder?" Connie reached out and poked her face, revealing a small dimple. When everyone saw that she had indeed become a little rounder, they couldn't help but smile a little. "You look quite cute," Meg said with a smile. The sinful supper was finished in the midst of everyone's disdainful laughter. Everyone bid farewell and left. "Good night. See you tomorrow." Raina said goodbye to Mia and the others, took out the key, and opened the door softly. The lights in the room were still on. Karen's was sitting at the table, sewing a piece of clothing seriously. There was a basket of clothes by her feet. "Mother, didn't I tell you to rest early? Why are you still sewing?" Raina closed the door and looked at Karen's with some helplessness and heartache. "I couldn't sleep, so I thought I might as well do something to kill time and wait for you to come back." Karen's tied a knot and broke it with her teeth. She turned around and smiled as she pointed at a small square wooden box on the table. "Someone just sent this wooden box over. He said it was from your friend." "Shan Shan." Raina walked to the table and reached out to pick up the exquisite brown wooden box that was slightly bigger than her palm. It was a little heavy. She had been too busy recently and had only seen Shan Shan once in the dining room. Besides the people in the dining room, Shan Shan was her only friend. She didn't think too much about it and opened the box. "It's not Shan Shan. It's a middle-aged man." He left after putting it down. Karen's gaze landed on the box in Raina's hand. "Middle-aged man?" Raina's hand froze, but the box had already been opened. A dazzling golden light bloomed from the box. In the box, a golden bracelet inlaid with jasper shone brightly under the light. What is this? Who gave you such a valuable gift?" Carla stepped forward and looked at the shiny bracelet in the box. The golden light flowed on the piece of jasper inlaid on the bracelet, like flowing waves. Under the bracelet, there was a silver note with 100,000 copper coins written on it. This! Rena already knew who the box was from. She quickly closed the lid and placed the box back on the table. She awkwardly said, "Someone I'm not familiar with gave it to me. I will return it tomorrow." "Mother, you don't have to worry." Karen's looked at Raina, who was dodging her eyes, and then looked at the wooden box on the table. She sat down at the table and looked a little serious. "Raina, are you hiding something from me? Who is that man? Why did he give you such a valuable gift? Mother. Raina looked at Karen's and met her stern eyes. She hesitated and said, he is the owner of a hot pot restaurant. I met him on the way back this evening. He asked me to be the manager of his hot pot restaurant. He said that as long as I agreed, he would give us a house in the wealthy district and 30% of the ownership of the restaurant. How did you reply to him? Karen's expression did not change because of the generous promise. She still asked sternly. I refused him, Raina replied quickly. Karen's expression eased a little. She pointed to the wooden box and asked, what about this? I don't know why he gave me such a valuable gift after I refused, but I will return it tomorrow morning. Raina shook her head. It was the first time she had seen such a valuable gift, and the silver note of 100,000 was a huge amount of money she had never owned before. You did the right thing, child. We can't accept this money in gift. Karen's nodded and said with some relief. But if you agree to him, you won't have to work so hard to sew clothes anymore. Raina looked at Karen's with some heartache. If you go to his restaurant, then what will you do? Rely on the hot pot that Mr. Meg taught you to make money for him? What's the difference between that and stealing? Karen's looked at Raina and said in a low voice, we can be poor, but we can't lose our principles and bottom line. We can't do things against our conscience. No matter how much money we get, I will never use a single copper coin. Mother, I understand. Raina's eyes gradually became clear and firm. She reached out and picked up the wooden box from the table. I will return the box now and make things clear to him. After saying that, she turned and walked out of the door. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.